A moment of silence for when Flight 93 crashed in Shanksville. You've been listening to the 9/11 ceremony in New York. Before that, the Pentagon, where the leaders of the military spoke, including the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, and the Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin. Secretary Austin will join us live in a moment. But first, let's bring back Garrett Graff and Julie.
Linda Christine Gronlund. My beloved brother and son, Richard Jerry Guadagno.
My brother-in-law, First Officer Leroy Homer, Jr.
Toshia Kuga.
After the moment of silence marking the moment that United Flight 93 plunged into the ground, the heroic passengers preventing the hijackers from completing their mission of that plane going to Washington, D.C. And as we hear these moments of silence and bells now, it compresses the day and takes us into the moment of how rapidly events unfolded on that day 20 years ago. Tom Llamas, NBC senior national correspondent, is in Shanksville.
Lucy Francis.
Gary J. Frank.
Morton H. Frank.
Peter Christopher Frank.
Colleen L. Fraser.
Richard K. Fraser.
Kevin J. Frawley.
Clyde Fraser Jr.
Lillian Inez Frederick.
Andrew Fredericks.
Tamitha Freeman.
Brett Owen Freeman.
Peter L. Freund.
Arlene Eva Fry.
Alan W. Friedlander.
And my uncle Jason Malabuyok de Chavez. We love you and we miss you. Thank you for being our guardian angel.
And my hero and my guardian angel, my uncle, Lieutenant Jeffrey P. Walls, FDNY, Ladder 9, Great Jones Street. Although I never got the privilege to meet you, so many people tell me that I remind them of you in so many ways, and I'm so honored to have your name as my middle name. We love and miss you dearly.
Andrew Keith Friedman.
Paul J. Friedman.
Greg J. Froner.
Lisa Ann Frost.
Peter Christian Fry.
Clement A. Fumando.
Stephen Elliott Furman.
Paul James Fermato.
Carlton Douglas Bay Fife.
Frederick Neil Gabler.
Richard Peter Gabriel.
Richard S. Gabriel.
James Andrew Gadiel.
Pamela Lee Gaff.
Irvin Vincent Galliard.
Deanna Lynn Galante.
Grace Catherine Galante.
Anthony Edward Gallagher.
Daniel James Gallagher.
John Patrick Gallagher.
Lords J. Galletti.
Kono E. Gallo.
Vincent Gallucci.
Thomas E. Galvin.
Giovanna Galetta Gambali.
Thomas Gambino Jr.
Gian F. Gamboa.
Ronald L. Gamboa.
Peter James Ganchi Jr.
Michael Gann.
Charles William Garbarini.
Andrew Sonny Garcia.
Caesar R. Garcia.
David Garcia.
Jorge Luis Moron Garcia.
Juan Garcia.
Marilyn Del Carmen Garcia.
Christopher Samuel Gardner.
Douglas Benjamin Gardner.
Harvey Joseph Gardner III.
And my cousin, victim of the 93 bombing, Johnny Boy DiGiovanni. We love you. We miss you very much. Hope to see you one day.
And my grandfather, Rick Knott Jaggernaut. We love you and we miss you. You live on through all your children and all your grandchildren.
Great idea. Now 59 of the 6.
This is
my vision here at this holy site was one of a lone fire engine with its crew at the ready for potential rescue and firefighting. Those first responders were shadowed by smoke rising from the impact zone into the nearby forest of the hemlock trees bordering this field. Now, my thoughts at the moment was that this was no longer a common field. It was traveled by so many who lived in this area, but this field was now sacred ground and common no more. So how did this vision of tragedy turn into a memory of complete victory? A wife of a fellow Los Angeles firefighter, Susie Bird, made a quilt, and then she asked Minnie to place a written message on the patches of that quilt. When I was given the pen, I recollected the vision that I had seen on September the 11th, 2001, and I wrote, "A common field one day, a field of honor forever." Now, these simple words caught the attention of one of the archivists who collected many thoughts that were sent here to this beautiful memorial. These words became the preamble for the mission statement that has guided and processed for permanently memorializing the 40 passengers and crew of Flight 93 over the past 20 years. Now, please, hear these words once again. A common field one day, a field of honor forever. May all who visit this place remember the collective acts of courage and sacrifice of the passengers and crew. Revere this hallowed ground as a final resting place of those heroes and reflect on the power of individuals who chose to make a difference. Peace be with you.
Colleagues, do you remember what you thought?
Well, it was interesting. Usually when we had our meeting, there was a good deal of casual conversation. But what struck me was that I wasn't getting the attention of anybody in the room. They were all watching the monitor, glued to the monitor, and I was virtually talking to an empty chamber in terms of my capacity to get their attention. Everybody was completely consumed already by what was going on.
And looking back, can you imagine having that meeting in light of everything that happened that morning?
No, well, obviously the meeting didn't last but a few minutes because right at the time all this was happening, a Capitol policeman broke in. He said, "We're getting out of here. I need everybody to come right now." And there was a mad scramble, literally running out of the Capitol building. I saw young staff. I even saw Senator Byrd carrying a couple of books and having some difficulty walking quickly, but nonetheless evacuating as we were all attempting to leave the building, not really sure where all this was going to lead.
Let me go back to the moment where you saw the smoke coming from the Pentagon across the mall. You're in this meeting room. Do you remember what your fellow senators said, what their expressions said to you?
Well, it was a sense of disbelief and a sense of real concern that there had to have been a connection between what we were seeing there and what we had just seen on TV. But what was the connection, and how is this all understood? I think there was tremendous confusion, a high degree of anxiety, a very palpable fear that something unusual in the extreme was going on.
And when you heard that a plane was heading for the Capitol, what did you think?
Well, at that point, I think the first thing most of us felt the need to do was to think of our own personal safety, and that was in part what led for the mad scramble out of the building. The odd thing was that we had no clue as to where we ought to go, and I remember just like you'd see in the movies with the SUV I was in, spinning its wheels and screeching out of the Capitol, tearing out of the Capitol grounds, and hearing my detail. I had a security detail at the time, instructing us to drive around until further orders could be established. It wasn't long after we literally drove with no appreciation of where we were going to the Capitol Police building. We were taken to the top floor of the Capitol Police building, which is very near the Capitol campus, and taken to the 4th floor, and they pulled the shades down, which I always thought was an odd thing to do. And then, of course, our first and most immediate concern was to try to connect with our family. The cell phones weren't working, so we all stood in this rather lengthy line. All the leaders were taken there, House and Senate, Republican and Democratic, and we were, I can recall feeling almost like a refugee, standing in line, waiting to get my turn to use the landline to call my wife.
When you're in that room, who else was with you?
Well, it was just leadership. So I know that Senator Lott was there, Senator Nichols, Senator Reed on the Senate side, and then I don't recall specifically each of the House members. Speaker Hastert was there, Dick Gephardt, and some of the other House leaders were there as well.
Do you remember at that point what you were thinking?
Well, again, there was a tremendous amount of confusion. We didn't know what to think. We didn't know who was behind this, how orchestrated, what came next, how much more damage was done. We were all trying to get as much information from limited media sources as we could. I was notified, and I can't recall now how I was told this, but I was notified that the local police department in my hometown of Aberdeen, South Dakota, picked up my mother and took her to the police station. Of course, my mother at that time was in her late 70s and was completely confused, I'm told, by the circumstances, but was taken as a precautionary measure. So all of these inexplicable matters, I couldn't get through to my wife. My wife was actually at the American Airlines building at the time because she works with American, and I had trouble connecting with her for some time.
From the moment that you left the Capitol, You made this route around Washington, D.C., ended up at the police headquarters. Do you remember what you saw, what the city looked like, what the streets of Washington, D.C. looked like?
Well, at that time, it was quite an amazing sight, because there was people were coming out of their buildings. I recall, of course, there was this mass exodus from the Capitol building, so there was a huge crowd that had gathered pretty much on the South Lawn. And but I remember seeing people come out of the other buildings in the Capitol complex as well. I think the conventional wisdom was that one was safer outside than inside. So that's what you saw, is a lot of people mulling around outside their buildings, looking up, obviously very confused, but it was total chaos.
Did you ever see the Capitol evacuated like that before?
Never before. We had a couple of occasions after that that were similar in moments of anxiety and extraordinary.
Various states which are breeding grounds for radical Islamist terrorists. They seek this ideology because it gives them meaning and purpose in their life. That has been very challenging for us to deal with, and in trying to change those conditions which breed this ideology. Going forward here, in my judgment, yes, I agree with Ari. We certainly want the president's decision to be the right one, that Afghanistan is not going to become a breeding grounds for future attacks on the United States. We are going to be challenged to be able to track and identify the terrorists that will be growing up in Afghanistan, because we don't have the presence. That's obvious to anybody looking at that. Attacking something that we identify is not going to be as challenging. Tracking it will really be the issue going forward. And we're going to have to maintain that vigilance. I think today is a day of remembrance, certainly, and reflection, but it can also be a day of renewal of our commitment and our vigilance to stay on top of this. And we have got to make that commitment. And we have succeeded so well in this country, and we haven't spoken much about it, but how the FBI and the intelligence programs that were developed, the counterintelligence programs in our country to protect us, the finances that the Department of Treasury has been able to go after and take away. We have an incredible capability post 9/11 that we didn't have before in dealing with these problems. And certainly we have created an awareness in America about what this threat is about. I am optimistic. I'm optimistic because of the American people and their resolve and the vigilance and determination that they have shown 20 years ago and they still continue to show today. The terrorists, with their ideology, will never defeat the idea of America. It is not possible. The idea is too big, it's too great, it touches too many people's hearts and affects too many people's character. That is our strength. It is the idea of America that burns inside of us and gives so many people in America the willingness to stand up and die for that idea. And I'm absolutely encouraged by the fact that we have those kind of people in America, and we will go forward and we will meet the threats that America is going to be challenged by, and America will continue to stand for what it is, and America will continue to survive.
Thank you, General, for that. America's sacrifice, that is what it has been for 20 years.
Who are struggling, frankly, with things like survivor's guilt, right? Split-second decisions, a moment to go see a colleague or to go down the hall, change the course of their lives forever. And that is a moment today, 20 years later, everybody reflects on it every year on 9/11, but it's so important and so poignant today.
One of the surviving families, John Marshall, was talking about trying to get to his wife in the Pentagon here and seeing the smoke and the firemen couldn't get in, and realized he couldn't, and that he realized he had a child in daycare in the Pentagon and needed to be a father and not have another child orphaned by this disaster.
the day that changed all of us 20 years ago. Andrea Mitchell, Hallie Jackson on duty at the Pentagon today. Thanks. So discordant again to hear the sound of jet aircraft. Of course, given the Pentagon's location hard alongside National Airport, it is understandable. But on this day of all days, we're joined by a good friend of both of ours, the eminent presidential historian and author, Michael Beschloss. Michael, I have an odd question to begin with, and it may require more time, thought, and attention than we have here. But tell me, is it a dotted line? Is it a red line? How did we get from this event we mark today, this hole in the earth, the worst tragedy in modern American history, certainly, to our current times, to the site of Nazi protesters on the campus of the university that Thomas Jefferson founded, to the site of our own citizens trying to change the course of a presidential election and ransacking our capital?
Absolutely, Brian. I'll try to do it fast. It's been 20 years that have in many ways been extremely rough. We've had 2 wars in Afghanistan and Iraq where American support among the people for those wars ebbed, and the presidents involved were never able to quite explain why we were there and risking American lives and risking American treasure. Another thing is that we felt after 9/11 that our government could not protect us from something that we had been protected from all during World War II and through the Cold War. There was never a direct major attack on American territory. This took us back to the sense of insecurity that Americans had in 1814 when the British came to Washington and burned the Capitol and the White House. But the overwhelming thing that almost makes me cry, and I certainly don't want to long for the world just before 9/11, but that was a world where Americans reacted to the tragedies that we're remembering this day and this heroism with unity. Just like after Pearl Harbor. In 1940, as you know, Brian, and you know, Nicole, Americans were divided right down the middle. Do we fight Hitler or do we not? It was a very bitter political division. But after we were attacked at Pearl Harbor, Americans united, and almost every American said, we now have to get involved in World War II to make the world safe for freedom and safe for American democracy. That's what happened after 9/11, even though we were in the wake of a bitter political division over the contested election between Gore and George W. Bush. If that happened today, 2021, would we see a scene, for instance, that we saw in 2001, which is in the wake of 9/11, Al Gore, who had lost the presidency by a Supreme Court order, many around him felt that it had been stolen from him, nevertheless gave a speech in the wake of 9/11 saying, George W. Bush is my president and I support him. Would Donald Trump and his people say the same thing if, God forbid, there were another 9/11 today?
Michael Beschloss, what do you think is owed to the people standing behind us, reading names in the instances of some of the children that have spoken, of relatives they've never got to meet?
Absolutely horrible. I mean, especially when I remember hearing someone referring to one of the women who was killed and her unborn child. That's what sort of unraveled me. And I remember my own kids, who were 7 and 5 that day. Our older boy, Alex, wanted to watch TV, and I yanked all the television cords out of the wall so that he couldn't see it. And so years later, I said, you know, I did that so that you wouldn't be traumatized. He said, well, didn't you know, Dad, I just went over to a friend and saw the whole thing on TV. Didn't quite work. But this is a day that you think about your children. And in the American tradition, the best thing we can do is recall the best of 9/11, and that is, I think, 2 things. Number one, the heroism of the people on those planes that saved them from crashing into the White House or the Capitol or somewhere else. They really saved at least the symbols of our democracy and American democracy itself. And the fact that in the wake of this tragedy, everyone came together. May that happen again.
Michael, that is the bell to mark the moment of silence that in turn marks the collapse of the North Tower, first to be struck, second to have fallen that morning. 102 minutes, that's right, after the first plane struck.
I never saw myself before you looked at me, before you kissed my lips, before you smiled at me, and I knew that day I would never be alone. And it's the only way. Life never got me low. Tears never broke me down. Inside I always know I'd be by your side. So alone. But all that is different right now. And everything is solid but the ground. You'll never be alone. You'll never be alone. If you fall, I'll catch you. I won't ever let you be alone. I never want you to feel uncertainty. I listen to every word, believe every single dream. The world has a funny way of making you feel like you're alone. And when trials and troubles come, loved one, you know that your welfare is my concern. And if I'm far away, you know that I'll find my way back to your side. When the tide starts to roll and the wind starts to blow, when the thing you're afraid of is invisible, you'll never be alone. You'll never be alone. You fall, I'll catch you. I won't ever let you be alone. If you fall, I'll catch you. I won't ever let you be alone. No, you'll never be alone.
Madam Vice President, Second Gentleman, President and Mrs. Bush, Secretary Holland, Governor Wolf, Captain Kurtz, Ambassador Kibben, Steve, Superintendent Clark, distinguished guests, families, friends, ambassadors, and all that join us today, near or far. I welcome you to the 20th Remembrance Ceremony of September 11th, 2001, here at the Flight 93 National Memorial. To the men and women that serve aboard the USS Somerset here today, and all of those active duty members and veterans in attendance, near and far, you honor us with your presence. And we must never forget that there are thousands of your brethren gravely injured or that have lost their lives while serving or as a result of their service during these past 20 years. Their loss reminds us that September 11th was not a singular event, but a date that marked a cultural paradigm shift in our country and for freedom-loving people across the globe. To the families of Flight 93 here and at home, honoring a loved one, my heart goes out to you. Having lost a brother on September 11th, I too live with a grief that is deep, consuming, and always present. For those that lost loved ones in the terrorist attacks on our country 20 years ago today, you know that we can never move on, but that we must continue to move forward. On September 11th, 2001, we lost a total of 2,977 innocent souls. And that morning, more than 6,000 people were injured in the attack on our country. 2,606 died in the World Trade Center, 125 at the Pentagon, and 246 innocent people were murdered on the 4 hijacked planes, 40 of which were on Flight 93, brought down here in a field just outside of Shanksville, Pennsylvania.
Pushed back from the gate at Newark on time, but there was the runways were.
Wallace Cole Hogan Jr.
that took part in the immediate rescue and continued recovery efforts have died from related illnesses. And with every month, we continue to lose more. The ripple effect of September 11th is unfathomable. There are still many questions to be answered about the day, facts to be declassified and released, and justice to be served. So much of September 11th involved pain, loss, and terror. Our lives were never to be the same. And yet, from the ashes of the day, stories of heroism and extraordinary courage emerged, providing hope to a world adrift in fear and confusion. First responders running into burning buildings with little regard for their own safety, while citizens inside those buildings refused to run from danger so that they could offer assistance and comfort to those less able, surely knowing that their decision would cost them all but their honor. And here in the skies over southwestern Pennsylvania, a group of 40 individuals, mostly strangers, when becoming aware of what was taking place on the ground that morning, found the courage to band together at a moment's notice, without regard for political, religious, professional, or cultural differences. Our 40, under extreme conditions, were able to change the course of history, averting the potential of our final image that fateful day, being the Capitol dome, collapsed and on fire, the greatest symbol of our democracy in ruins. As the personification of that symbol, our heroes embraced the tenets of democracy that no expression of terrorism will ever extinguish. E pluribus unum. Out of many, one. Our heroes united. They formulated a plan when confronted by a great evil. They prayed. They voted on a course of action, and then they struck. Though in the process, they lost their lives, there is no question that they won the first battle in this current war on terrorism. 35 minutes, 9:28 to 10:03 a.m. From the initial terrorist attack on Flight 93 until the moment the plane came down on our sacred ground. A lifetime, a moment, forever yesterday. Here on the ground, first responders, aware of what was taking place in New York, at the Pentagon, and in the midst of fear and uncertainty, instinctively reacted to the horror that was brought to their rural community in a way that has forever altered their lives. These proud men and women of Somerset County and the surrounding region demonstrated everything that is awesome about the United States of America. Terrorism met rural America, proud, strong, determined. The relationship our families and our nation has forged with this local community is extraordinary. To our extended family here in the Somerset County region, you will forever have our complete gratitude. You have embraced us and the story of our loved ones in a selfless, fiercely protective fashion, even as you continue to move forward, carrying the pain and anguish thrust upon your community 20 years ago. Recently, I was listening to former Congressman Trey Gowdy discussing the ultimate sacrifices made by our men and women in uniform. During his remarks, I was struck by a common theme that I do not recall highlighted in prior years. It was a theme that I felt strongly was consistent with the story of the heroes of Flight 93 and all those we lost on September 11th. I experienced a moment of clarity that brought my understanding of heroism and of sacrifice to an uncomfortable reality, moving me to question who we are as a society. What struck such a nerve was not the annual reminder to honor and remember the thousands of lives ripped from the embrace of their families the morning of September 11th, 2001, including the 40 heroes of Flight 93. But rather the question to be considered is, are we worthy of their sacrifice? Are we worthy? Do we as individuals, communities, and as a country conduct ourselves in a manner that would make those that sacrificed so much and fought so hard on September 11th proud of who we have become? And fought so hard on September 11th proud of who we have become? Do we share the same willingness to sacrifice for others in little ways as well as large? To act when necessary for no other reason than to accomplish a noble goal, egoless, and with no other motivation than to do what is right? Do we cherish the hard-earned freedoms that we enjoy, secured every generation by those willing to stand toe-to-toe with anyone or any country willing to steal them away? The real question that we must all ask ourselves is, have we as a society moved on and left the hard-earned lessons of September 11th behind? Have we become desensitized to what really happened that fateful morning? Have we diminished the courageous actions of these brave men and women, these heroes we honor today at the Flight 93 National Memorial, as well as those in New York City and at the Pentagon, by relegating their stories to the history books? As a country, we shouldn't seek to move on, but rather let us dedicate ourselves to moving forward, honoring and remembering the sacrifices made on September 11th, the lessons we learned, remembering the names, the individuals, and the collective actions of so many that day. Let us be worthy of the selfless sacrifices that were made. Let us remember who we became on September 12th. In the aftermath of September 11th, we saw beyond our differences so that in unity we could survive the devastation of the day. E pluribus unum.
It is such a poetic scene, a field of green in Central.
Whether it was in the air or on the ground that morning, heroism was revealed. History was made, and the course of our lives were changed forever. The path we follow is up to us. Let us strive to be worthy of those we lost that morning, our 40 heroes, our loved ones, and the thousands of other innocent lives extinguished that day and in the aftermath of September 11th. E pluribus unum. Thank you.
Thank you, Gordy. An enduring moment in the days after September 11th occurred when President George W. Bush used a bullhorn to speak to firefighters at Ground Zero in New York. His words provided sorely needed encouragement to a grieving country. A common thread of heroism running through each of the 3 attack sites on September 11th was the devotion to duty shown by our first responders. They made the nation proud then, and they continue to do that now. Thank you to all of our first responders across these great United States, for we are truly grateful for your service. I'm greatly honored now to present our next speaker, the 43rd President of the United States of America, George W. Bush. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Accompanying him today is First Lady Laura Bush, who occupies a special place in the hearts and families of Flight 93. For on September 17th, Mrs. Bush traveled here to offer her condolences and to those of America to the families and passengers of Flight 93. President Bush is fondly remembered by everyone involved in the effort to commemorate the heroes of Flight 93 for signing the act that created this national memorial on September 24th, 2002. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the 43rd President of the United States, George W. Bush.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you very much. Laura and I are honored to be with you. Madam Vice President, Vice President Cheney, Governor Wolf, Secretary Holland, and distinguished guests. 20 years ago, we all found in different ways, in different places, but all at the same moment, that our lives would be changed forever. The world was loud with carnage and sirens, and then quiet with missing voices that would never be heard again. These lives remain precious to our country and infinitely precious to many of you. Today we remember your loss, we share your sorrow, and we honor the men and women you have loved so long and so well. For those too young to recall that clear September day, it is hard to describe the mix of feelings we experienced. There was horror at the scale of destruction, and awe at the bravery and kindness that rose to meet it. There was shock at the audacity of evil, and gratitude for the heroism and decency that opposed it. in the sacrifice of the first responders, in the mutual aid of strangers, in the solidarity of grief and grace, the actions of an enemy revealed the spirit of a people, and we were proud of our wounded nation. In these memories, the passengers and crew of Flight 93 must always have an honored place. Here, the intended targets became the instruments of rescue, and many who are now alive owe a vast, unconscious debt to the defiance displayed in the skies above this field. It would be a mistake to idealize the experience of those terrible events. All that many people could initially see was the brute randomness of death. All that many could feel was unearned suffering. All that many could hear was God's terrible silence, with a lonely pain that cuts deep within. In those fateful hours, we learned other lessons as well. We saw that Americans were vulnerable, but not fragile. That they possess a core of strength that survives the worst that life can bring. We learned that bravery is more common than we imagined, emerging with sudden splendor in the face of death. We vividly felt how every hour with our loved ones was a temporary and holy gift. And we found that even the longest days end. Many of us have tried to make spiritual sense of these events. There is no simple explanation for the mix of providence and human will that sets the direction of our lives. But comfort can come from a different sort of knowledge. After wandering long and lost in the dark, many have found they were actually walking step by step toward grace. As a nation, our adjustments have been profound. Many Americans struggled to understand why an enemy would hate us with such zeal. The security measures incorporated into our lives are both sources of comfort and reminders of our vulnerability. And we have seen growing evidence that the dangers to our country can come not only across borders, but from violence that gathers within. There is little cultural overlap between violent extremists abroad and violent extremists at home. But in their disdainful pluralism, in their disregard for human life, in their determination to defile national symbols, they are children of the same foul spirit, and it is our continuing duty to confront them. After 9/11, millions of brave Americans stepped forward and volunteered to serve in the armed forces. The military measures taken over the last 20 years to pursue dangers at their source have led to debate. But one thing is certain. We owe an assurance to all who have fought our nation's most recent battles. Let me speak directly to veterans and people in uniform. The cause you pursued at the call of duty is the noblest America has to offer. You have shielded your fellow citizens from danger. You have defended the beliefs of your country and advanced the rights of the downtrodden. You have been the face of hope and mercy in dark places. You have been a force for good in the world. Nothing that has followed, nothing, can tarnish your honor or diminish your accomplishments. To you and to the honored dead, our country is forever grateful. In the weeks and months following the 9/11 attacks, I was proud to lead an amazing, resilient, united people. When it comes to the unity of America, those days seem distant from our own. Malign force seems at work in our common life that turns every disagreement into an argument, and every argument into a clash of cultures. So much of our politics has become a naked appeal to anger, fear, and resentment. That leaves us worried about our nation and our future together. I come without explanations or solutions. I can only tell you what I've seen. On America's day of trial and grief, I saw millions of people instinctively grab for a neighbor's hand and rally to the cause of one another. That is the America I know. Rally to the cause of one another. That is the America I know. At a time when religious bigotry might have flowed freely, I saw Americans reject prejudice and embrace people of Muslim faith. That is the nation I know. At a time when nativism could have stirred hatred and violence against people perceived as outsiders, I saw Americans reaffirm their welcome to immigrants and refugees. That is the nation I know. At a time when some viewed the rising generation as individualistic and decadent, I saw young people embrace an ethic of service and rise to selfless action. That is the nation I know. This is not mere nostalgia. It is the truest version of ourselves. It is what we have been and what we can be again. 20 years ago, terrorists chose a random group of Americans on a routine flight to be collateral damage in a spectacular act of terror. The 33 passengers and 7 crew of Flight 93 could have been any group of citizens selected by fate. In a sense, they stood in for us all. The terrorists soon discovered that a random group of Americans is an exceptional group of people facing an impossible circumstance. They comforted their loved ones by phone, braced each other for action, and defeated the designs of evil. These Americans were brave, strong, and united in ways that shocked the terrorists, but should not surprise any of us. This is the nation we know. And whenever we need hope and inspiration, we can look to the skies and remember. God bless.
An emotional President Bush, the 43rd President of the United States, who was Commander-in-Chief on that fateful day, 9/11/2001, and we're honored to be in the presence of 2 people who know him well in different contexts, Jenna Bush Hager, his daughter, and Andy Card, former White House Chief of Staff.
Speech from the former president who presided over those very difficult days 20 years ago. And he also honored the veterans who have fought over the course of 20 years following 9/11. He spoke to their families and spoke to the young people who were inspired by the events of that day to do something for their country. We're going to stay with Shanksville now. We expect to hear from Vice President Kamala Harris shortly. But a performance to follow the president here, and you can see the gathering. Not a terribly large gathering. They're socially distant from one another. And we should note that these are just the families who are directly connected to the events of that day, who lost loved ones. And you heard the president there talk about the phone calls in those final moments. Let's listen to the performance.
How could we not embrace, to my left, the incredible men and women of the President's own United States Marine Band? Formed in 1798, it's America's oldest continuously active professional musical organization. Think about that. Its mission is to perform for the United States President and the Commandant of the Marine Corps We are truly privileged to enjoy this national treasure. Ladies and gentlemen, please once again join me in thanking and appreciating the incredible President's Own. The Secretary of the United States Department of the Interior, Deb Haaland, the 54th person entrusted with that responsibility. She leads a department which employs more than 70,000 people, whose mission it is to protect and manage this country's natural resources as well as our beautiful and absolutely powerful cultural heritage. Would you all please join me in welcoming Secretary Deb Haaland.
Thank you all so much. President Bush, thank you for your inspiring words. Madam Vice President, very honored to be here with you. Families, friends, active duty service personnel, thank you so much for the opportunity to join you all on this somber anniversary. 20 years ago, I was waking up to get my first grader ready for school and was stunned by the news on the radio. I rushed to turn on the TV and watch the imagery in disbelief. Like many parents, I nervously took my child to school. The pickup line was longer than usual that day. I know parents just wanted to hold their children close as soon as they could. Instead of being in a rush to get to their next event, soccer practice, or home for homework, parents, students, teachers, and school support staff joined hands around the school for a moment of silence. We mourned together. Every year on this day, we remember those we lost. We remember the first responders who ran in when everyone was running out. We remember the emergency crews who helped in the aftermath of that fateful day. We remember where we were and how we felt. And on this hallowed ground, we remember the heroes who made the ultimate sacrifice to save others. We honor their families, and we recognize the selfless patriotism they demonstrated on that September morning 20 years ago. It is with the support of the families of Flight 93, the Flight 93 Advisory Commission, the Flight 93 Memorial Task Force, Friends of Flight 93, and the National Park Foundation that this memorial serves as an enduring reminder of their bravery. There's no way to know how many lives these heroes saved, but we show our gratitude by visiting this place, gathering with loved ones, and most importantly, building a country where their children and grandchildren can thrive. Building a country of which they would be proud. We at the Interior Department will live up to that sacred responsibility by being good stewards of this memorial for generations to come. I appreciate everyone who works so hard every day, including our National Park Service employees and the volunteers, to care for this land, to honor it for those who were lost, so that we may never forget their sacrifice.
Face the challenge at this time.
Very rarely in focus other than on its anniversary.
Carlos R.
Again, it's naive to think that
I support George W. Bush.
This memorial, they and other children will know the story of what happened here. A set of brave individuals who made the ultimate sacrifice for our country. Their story will live on. To continue our remembrance, it is my honor and privilege to introduce our esteemed Vice President, Kamala Harris.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. Good morning. President Bush, it is my honor to be on this stage with you and Mrs. Laura Bush, and thank you, President Bush, for your words. They are as resonant today as the words you spoke 20 years ago. Governor Tom Wolf, Superintendent Stephen Clark, Madam Secretary, and the President of the families of Flight 93, Gordon Feld. It is truly an honor to be with all of you at this field of honor. We are joined today, of course, by the family and friends of the 40 passengers and crew members of Flight 93. And we stand today with all those who lost someone on September 11th, 2001, and in the aftermath of the attacks. So many in our nation, too many in our nation, have deeply felt the passage of time these last 20 years. Every birthday, your loved one missed. Every holiday. Every time her favorite team won, or his favorite song came on the radio. Every time you've tucked in your children, or dropped them off at college. You have felt every day, every week, and every year that has passed these 20 years. So please know your nation sees you, and we stand with you, and we support you. We are gathered today on hallowed ground, at this place that has been sanctified by sacrifice of grave terrorism. I remember when I first learned about what happened on that fateful flight. What happened on Flight 93 told us then, and it still tells us, so much about the courage of those on board who gave everything they possibly could, about the resolve of the first responders who risked everything, and about the resilience of the American people. On this 20th anniversary, on this solemn day of remembrance, we must challenge ourselves, yes, to look back, to remember, for the sake of our children, for the sake of their children. And for that reason, we must also look forward. We must also look toward the future. Because in the end, I do believe that is what the 40 were fighting for. Their future and ours.
Twin Towers, there were also thousands.
The days that followed, September 11th, 2001, we were all reminded that unity is possible in America. We were reminded also that unity is imperative in America. It is essential to our shared prosperity, to our national security, and to our standing in the world.
The President of the United States is making some remarks at a special ceremony.
Richard D. Lynch, Jr.
And I believe that in America, our diversity is our strength. At the same time, we saw after 9/11 how fear can be used to sow division in our nation. As Sikh and Muslim Americans were targeted because of how they looked or how they worshiped. But we also saw what happens when so many Americans, in the spirit of our nation, stand in solidarity with all people and their fellow American, with those who experience violence and discrimination, when we stand together. And looking back, we remember the vast majority of Americans were unified in purpose to help families heal, to help communities recover, to defend our nation, and to keep us safe. in a time of outright terror, we turned toward each other. In the face of a stranger, we saw a neighbor and a friend. And that time reminded us the significance and the strength of our unity as Americans, and that it is possible in America. So, moments from now, we will leave this hallowed place, still carrying with us the pain of this loss, this tremendous loss, and still, the future will continue to unfold. We will face new challenges, challenges that we could not have seen 20 years ago. We will seize opportunities that were at one time unimaginable. And we know that what lies ahead is not certain. It is never certain. It has never been. But I know this: if we do the hard work of working together as Americans, if we remain united in purpose, we will be prepared for whatever comes next. The 40 passengers and crew members of Flight 93, as we all know, they didn't know each other. Most of them didn't know each other. They were different people from different places. They were on that particular flight for different reasons. But they did not focus on what may separate us. No, they focused on what we all share, on the humanity we all share. In a matter of minutes, in the most dire of circumstances, the 40 responded as one. They fought for their own lives and to save the lives of countless others at our nation's capital. After today, it is my hope and prayer that we continue to honor their courage, their conviction, with our own, that we honor their unity by strengthening our common bonds, by strengthening our global partnerships, and by always living out our highest ideals. This work will not be easy. It never has been. And it will take all of us believing in who we are as a nation. And it will take all of us going forth to work together. Thank you all. May God bless you, and may God bless America. Thank you.
By saying she's honored to share that stage with former President George W. Bush, signaling the unity that she was about to speak to. And she said 20 years ago, we turned and looked into the faces of strangers, and we saw friends.
What she said about unity,
Thank you again,
and
Madam
not
Vice
meaning that, yes, we had our differences in 2001. We're not trying to rewrite history.
For this national memorial,
And it's not being uniformity. There's a difference, and how she pointed that out. But just struck David by the intimacy of this ceremony in Shanksville.
of that group. I would like to thank everyone who has given their time as a Flight 93 ambassador over the years, as you are, in many ways, the heart and soul of this very special place. Thank you all. Folks, it's literally over 10,000 hours a year by our ambassadors every day of the year, including those bitter, cold Western Pennsylvania February mornings. You
York as safe as possible, but at the same time we had to look forward, and we had to look forward with confidence. And I knew down here we had to do at least two things: honor those who died and the memory of those who died in a way that future generations would understand the magnitude of the loss, and yet rebuild in a way that would inspire not just New York, but America. And we've done that. And that was the vision we had. And I'm very proud today we've accomplished that vision.
You know, Governor, over the years, and you and I have gotten together as governor, and then you were former governor. With each successive anniversary, we'd be at various points around this area, and it seemed to take forever. You know, after the horror of that, and looking for hope for survivors, precious few. Then the rebuilding, then the controversy over what you build and how you memorialize this event. And you were fighting for the Freedom Tower itself. Tell me a little bit about that.
Nothing I think I or anyone could say to change anyone's well-formed views of Vice President Cheney, but I think his daughter is still carving out her space in this battle with extremism and this threat to the American homeland. And I think she becomes a pretty important figure in what the next chapter of fighting extremist threats to the nation's capital and the country will look like.
Cheney's personal history is much more complex, and I'm quite certain at this point in his career he would be happy if his daughter Liz was his political legacy.
Yeah, and you have to assume that they talk. I mean, George W. Bush certainly talked to his father, George H.W. Bush. The country has changed, though, and I think that these rebukes of the dark forces on a day like today are important, and they have their place. I'm still sort of shaken, though, by the tributes to the people who've lost. I have in front of me the president's speech. George W. Bush said the passengers and crew of Flight 93 must always have an honored place. The intended targets became the instruments of rescue.
Yeah.
I mean, what an amazing way to think of it. Intended target. They were supposed to be the victims of this terrorist attack, and they likely rescued other targets in Washington, D.C. from a terrorist attack.
We dwelled on it at the time.
Dean E. Mattson.
Robert D. Mattson.
Walter A. Matuza, Jr.
Timothy J. Maud.
Jill Moorer Campbell.
Charles A. Morrow, Jr.
Charles J. Morrow.
Dorothy Morrow.
Nancy T. Morrow.
Robert J. Maxwell.
Renee A. May.
Tyrone May.
Keithroy Marcellus Maynard.
Robert J. Mayo.
Kathy N. Mazza.
Edward Mazzella, Jr.
Jennifer Lynn Mazzotta.
Karya Mumbaya.
James Joseph McAllery, Jr.
Brian Gerard McAleese.
Patricia Ann McKenney.
Colin R. MacArthur.
John Kevin McAvoy.
Kenneth M. McBrayer.
Brendan F. McCabe.
Michael McCabe.
Thomas Joseph McCann.
Justin McCarthy.
Kevin M. McCarthy.
Michael Desmond McCarthy.
And my uncle, Port Authority Police Officer Alphonse Joseph Niedermeyer III, who I miss and love very much.
And my father, Gary Harold. Dad, we miss you every day. Please continue to watch over us, especially your 3 grandchildren and the new one on the way. I speak to my kids all the time about you. They know how Pop was a hero who helped many of people down on that horrible day. Lucas has your sweet personality. Ashlyn is strong, sassy, and funny, and Declan could be your twin. Thank you for always being my guiding light and helping me to stay strong. I hope I could be half the parent that you were to us. I miss you every day.
Right now, some of them are pretty confused, wondering, did we do the right thing? Should we have done what we did? What's your message to them?
Well, my message is that we know that some will have a tough time working their way through this, but each person has to work their way through this on an individual basis. And I think we have to give them space, the space to do that. And I think we should also remind our troops and our civilians that if they need help, don't be afraid to reach out and get that help. And so It's going to take a little time to work through this, but you know, it's to be expected that you'll hear opinions from all sides of the conversation, and that's okay. That's who we are. That's America. So.
How did 9/11 change U.S. alliances with NATO and other partners?
Well, we saw NATO, you know, come into Afghanistan in a major way as one of our allies, because we were a part of the alliance, and that alliance, I think, has remained strong throughout. And our goal is to continue to strengthen it. So.
Because, as you know, some of those NATO allies were deeply disappointed. Not that the war is over. Everybody wanted the war to be over. Everybody wanted to get out of Afghanistan. But the way it ended, yes, 120, 125,000 people got out, but there are still thousands left who would like to come here.
And what we've told our allies and what we tell our own people is that we'll continue to work together to get as many people out that desire to come out going forward. And this is not over. Our efforts to help the people who have helped us are not over.
There are still Americans left in Afghanistan too, and what you're saying is you're going to try to get them all out.
You've seen most recently here, Wolf, a couple of plane loads of American citizens that have left Afghanistan.
Are we going to see more of that?
I hope. And we're working hard to make sure, the State Department's working hard to make sure that that happens.
Because you were just there in Doha, Qatar, working on this issue. Tell us what you found out.
Well, you know, the Qataris have been enormously helpful in our efforts here to evacuate 124,000 people, which is historic. And in my mind, the youngsters who were a part of this did heroic work. My goal was to and what I accomplished was to thank the Qataris for the tremendous help, the partnership that they continue to provide us. It's really, really strong. So.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know that the U.S. has a very significant military presence at the El Udeid Air Base in Qatar, at Camp Asaliya in Qatar. It's a major U.S. military facility.
Yeah, you've been there, Wolf.
I've been there, yeah.
And
spent some quality time there.
Yeah, and you know that's where we use our capabilities there to support a range of activities throughout the region.
Bottom line, because I know you got to run, is the United States safer today than it was 20 years ago?
Wolf, I think if you look at the fact that our capabilities are greatly increased from what we had 20 years ago, if you look at the fact that the way that we operate in the interagency is far beyond what we would have ever imagined 20 years ago, I think we are safer altogether, yes.
But your biggest...
Like that above. My country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the Pilgrim's pride, from every mountainside. Let freedom ring, let freedom ring.
D'Aurelia Giovanna Mena.
Dora Marie Menchaca.
Charles R. Mendez.
Lizette Mendoza.
Siobhan Alicia Mentes.
Wolfgang Peter Menzel.
Steve John Mercado.
Wilfredo Mercado.
Wesley Mercer.
Ralph Joseph Mercurio.
Alan Harvey Merdinger.
George L. Marino.
Yamel Josephina Marino.
George Mercuris.
and my cousin Gary Michael Albero. Gary, our family misses your love, laughter, and smile. You live in each and every one of us every day. We love you, and please give Dad a hug for us. God bless you all, and God bless America.
And my grandfather, Battalion Chief Lawrence T. Stack. 20 years ago, I met my grandfather, BC Lawrence T. Stack. He held me in his arms, his first of 6 grandchildren. 7 days later, he was gone from the city and family he loved. We will love and miss you forever. Never forget 9/11 and the first responders who protect our city every day. We thank our military and our first responders to our country, and God bless America. Thank you.
Are severe weather events on aging infrastructure, the impacts on aging infrastructure. We've got aging infrastructure just within a couple of blocks of where you and I sit.
But for bad guys who might wish us ill, are you any more worried about what went down in Afghanistan with the Taliban back in charge that could provide cover for, even if they weren't up to it, for others who, like they did 20 years ago for Al-Qaeda?
I am worried anytime there is a place on this planet that could serve as a launching pad for a terrorist attack.
Do you think Afghanistan could?
That could be Afghanistan, could be Horn of Africa, could be Yemen, could be Iraq, Syria, any place where a terrorist group could get a foothold, establish a caliphate, recruit, train. ISIS-K is on the rise now because of the profile of that attack the other week.
But as you said, it doesn't only have to be ISIS-K. It could be any one of a number of groups, domestic and otherwise. And we talk a lot, Secretary, about attacks that have been stopped since 9/11, but there were many being plotted and planned. Your office saw them, your predecessors saw them. So is it a matter of just weeding them out and catching a midterm, or do we get lucky? A little bit of both? What?
A number of things. First of all, you're right. The American people would, I think, be proud of the job that our law enforcement, our homeland security, our military, our intelligence community does to stop something bad from happening before we ever hear about it in the public at large. But the issue is now, when you're dealing with a terrorist organization, we've got to be concerned about those who are here, who radicalize in secret, who can do a lot of damage. And that is why, when I was in office, I spent a lot of time trying to build bridges to communities where there may be someone in their midst who is radicalizing in secret. And so the threat to our nation evolved even as we speak 20 years later after 9/11. And so I hope that we never get complacent. We're always trying to look one step ahead, stay one step ahead of the bad guys, and anticipate something before it happens. There are a lot of plots that we catch at a very early stage.
Yeah, there are a lot of people who are always after us, right? I mean, we forget the magnitude of hate. It's out there, it's palpable, but you know, you just got to be vigilant.
Got to be vigilant. As I was entering Ground Zero this morning, I was heartened to see so many TSOs, Secret Service agents, all of whom used to work for me, at the magnetometers.
Did they let you in? I guess
they let me in. They still
that would be kind of
recognize me.
funny. You're like, no, we're not going to bother with it.
Right. If I had said, I used to be Secretary of Homeland Security.
Well, that's great.
Sure you
Where's
were.
your pass?
Get in the back of the line. Right.
Secretary, very good seeing you. Very nice. On a
Thanks,
beautiful
man.
day, much like the day started
Exactly like
20 years ago. Secretary Jay Johnson served in the Obama administration. I want to go right now to a guy who, if you think about it, about a year before had the first hint of terror when his ship, the USS Cole, was hit by a terror bombing. Guys who got out to the boat and were able to explode, kill 18 sailors. That was in October of the year 2000. And what we know happened just about 11 months later. Many say that was a preview to coming attractions. Commander Kirk Lippold with us right now. Commander, Very nice to see you. What do you think of where we stand, Commander, 20 years after 9/11, and by extension, 21 years after the USS Cole?
Richard J. Well, Neil, first, thank you for having me on a solemn day like this as we pause to remember those who paid a terrible price for governments that didn't do anything in response to the attack on USS Cole. When I look back 20 years ago, 9/11, the one thing I would say is that morning, Americans didn't care about the status of their stock portfolio. They didn't care about the latest office gossip. They didn't care about the argument they may have had with their neighbor. What they really cared about that morning came down to two things. Is my family safe, and is my nation safe? And when you really think about it, Neil, it's national security, both in the short term and the long term, that underpins everything we do as a nation. And unless we put national security at the forefront, we aren't going to be able to enjoy some of these things that we have in the future. Our freedom, a robust economy, and a society that hopefully can begin to come together in reflection on this somber day.
Please continue to watch over Daddy.
Not been decapitated, because at that moment you do not want your foes or your friends to think that you are not functioning. And so that's how the day went until finally the president arrived and we got ready for his address to the nation.
That was not preordained, right? He demanded that he come back. Talk about that.
He did. Well, I talked to him several more times and he kept saying, I'm coming back, and I kept saying, you can't. And then finally, in a conversation with Karen Hughes, he just refused any entreaty that he was going to stay in Nebraska. He was at Offutt Field, one of our military installations. And at that point, I knew it was useless to try to talk him out of it. He was coming back. He came back. He landed on the South Lawn, you know, where the helicopter Marine One lands. He first asked to see Mrs. Bush, which he did for a moment, and then he said he was going to address the nation, but it was just to be a speech about reassurance, that the nation was shaken. This was not a policy speech, and it was a very short speech. But the one line that we did put in the speech at his direction was, if you harbor a terrorist, we will treat you as a terrorist. That became known as the Bush Doctrine. And he decided that was something he had to say that night.
Condi, you know, I know you're far away from Washington, but there's no such thing as a bubble anymore. How do you feel when you read the harsh recriminations for policies such as the one you just described, the Bush Doctrine, 20 years later?
I just say to people, if on September 12th you had told me or anybody else that we weren't going to have another major attack on American territory, I wouldn't have taken that bet. And we didn't. And it wasn't by accident. And it wasn't just the Bush administration, although I think we created the most of the apparatus that has helped keep us safe, a Homeland Security Department, a National Counterterrorism Center that can merge intelligence from the outside and the inside. One of the problems that we had was the FBI did internal intelligence and the CIA did external intelligence, and we didn't marry them together. The work that we did in Afghanistan with our Afghanistan allies to deny al-Qaeda that sanctuary where they could plot and plan. And so I think the result was one that I'm very grateful for. I don't even say proud of. I'm just grateful that we kept the peace. And subsequent administrations have that apparatus and have used it. I will say that those who say that we were overreaching to try to help Afghanistan become more democratic and more stable, first of all, it was the only way to honor the fallen, that the United States of America would stick with its values. And that's a belief that the values of democracy are universal, that everybody should have a chance, that women in Afghanistan should be able to go to school, girls should go to school. Infant mortality went down, maternal mortality went down. And oh, by the way, in the bargain that we made with the Afghan people that we would try to make their lives better, we remembered that failed states are the cesspool in which terrorists breed. And so we actually were, in our own self-interest, trying to make Afghanistan more stable. And it didn't end that way. The Taliban is now back in control. I don't believe it had to be that way. I think we lost patience and we lost will. We had enough patience to stay in Korea for 70 years with 28,000 American forces in what is basically a stalemate. We didn't win that war either, but we prevented the South Korean government from being overrun by a crazy man from the north. I think we might have been able to do the same in Afghanistan. Not every war can be won. They don't certainly have to be lost.
Secretary Condoleezza Rice.
Nee. Pete Negron. Lori Ann Nera. Ann N. Nelson. David William Nelson. Ginger Risco Nelson. James A. Nelson. Michelle Ann Nelson. Peter Allen Nelson. Oscar Francis Nesbitt. Gerard Terrence Nevins. Renee Taltrop Newell. Christopher C. Newton. Christopher Newton Carter. Nancy Ewan Nago. And my younger brother, Michael Cameron Lynch. He was a wonderful son, brother, husband, and father. We miss him every day. I know you must be so proud, as I am, of your beautiful daughter, Caroline, your wonderful nephew, Paul, and your niece, Cassidy, who's a sergeant in the Army. We love you, Morty. You're always in our hearts. God bless America. And my beloved husband, Derek James Stakavicus. Tyler, Chase, and I miss you and love you very much.
That I should do to whatever extent that it can be of help.
You lived just 9 blocks from Ground Zero on that horrible day.
Yeah.
I'm wondering what memories you have, what you're thinking about today.
Well, I'm thinking that all this time went by, and so many things have happened to us all since then and now, and it's an emotional time remembering specific things that happened, and it's just that I hope that people remember for time to come that things like this can be avoided through diplomacy, through whatever. I know that's easier said than done, but we really, this is an awful nightmarish incident, and all the people who are there today talking about their loved ones. We have to find a way to move forward as far as the animosity, to say it mildly, towards each other and cultures and so on, and even what we're going through today in this country. We have to find a way to stop, I don't know, a better way of saying than fighting and just having things like this happen. It just makes no sense.
You've also been very active in helping to bring back businesses and economic prosperity to lower Manhattan in the aftermath of that horrible day. People might forget that it wasn't just a matter of the horrific terrorist attack. It was the aftermath, the economic emptiness, the void. Part of that effort by you included the Tribeca Film Festival, of course. How do you think New York has changed since the attacks 20 years on as a city?
Well, from my perspective, I don't know. There could be other feelings about it. I think it comes back because New York will, in my opinion, always come back. It's a tough city, and the people here are resilient, and we'll just come back, and we are coming back, and things, time moves on. It's just the terrible things that happened before and in between that we wish we didn't have to have, period. But it's changed. It's come back. The neighborhood downtown Tribeca's come back. Now we have the pandemic. That's another a horrible situation. But we'll get through that too. And it's just all the loss of life and sadness and unhappiness in between. I wish we could have.
This year's obviously a momentous anniversary, the 20th anniversary. Yeah, no, absolutely. This is the 20th anniversary, and this is the 20th anniversary. I'm sorry about the delay. And it's so disconcerting and unusual, I think, for older folks like you and me to see this new generation of brave first responders, police officers, firemen, firewomen, Marines, who have no memory of 9/11. None. They were either kids or not even born.
None. Yeah.
What do you hope the memorials that you're involved with will teach the next generation?
That this can happen again, unfortunately, and that kids have to be reminded. And of course, one of the most horrible of them all was the Holocaust, and what preceded it, and how it was allowed to grow and become a malignant cancer. And that can happen again. And we don't want that. No one wants that kind of thing to happen again. But kids have to be reminded in school what happens historically can happen again very easily. It happens in another form, but it's the same disease. That to me is the most important thing of 9/11. A reminder, because 20 years is really not much time in the grand scheme of things. But that to me is the most important. Reminders in school that this can happen, why it happens, how people start thinking that they have a right to do these types of things for whatever their cause is. That's the thing that concerns me the most, because then history repeats itself, and we don't want this kind of history to repeat itself.
Anda.
Seamus L. O'Neill.
John P. O'Neill.
Peter J. O'Neill, Jr.
Sean Gordon Corbett O'Neill.
Betty Ann Ong.
Michael C. Opperman.
Christopher T. Orgilowitz.
Margaret Quinn Arlosky.
Virginia Ann Ormiston.
Ruben S. Ornado.
Kevin M. O'Rourke.
Ronald Orsini.
Peter Keith Ortali.
Juan Ortega Campos.
Jane Marie Orth.
Alexander Ortiz.
David Ortiz.
Emilio Pete Ortiz.
Pablo Ortiz.
And my uncle, Matthew J. Burke. Your memory and legacy are forever preserved through family and friends. God bless you, and God bless America.
And my brother, firefighter Michael Francis Lynch. We know what you were doing on that day, and your boys are doing beautifully. Michael and Jack, we're so proud of Denise. Jack was 6 months old, and Michael was 3 years old when you were murdered. And all we do now is tell them about your past glory days.
O'Shea.
Patrick J. O'Shea.
Robert William O'Shea.
Elsie Carolina Osorio Oliva.
James R. Ostrowski.
Timothy Franklin O'Sullivan.
Jason Douglas Oswald.
Michael John Oten.
Isidro D. Ottenwalder.
Michael Shung Wu.
Tar Joseph Oida.
Jesus Ovales.
Peter J. Owens, Jr.
Adianes Oyoya,
Angel M. Pabon Jr.,
Israel Pabon Jr.,
Roland Pacheco,
Michael Benjamin Packer,
Diana B. Padro,
Deepa Pakala,
Jeffrey Matthew Palazzo,
Thomas Palazzo,
Richard A. Palazzolo,
Oreo Joseph Palmer,
Frank Anthony Palumbo,
Alan N. Palumbo,
Christopher Matthew Pennetier,
Dominique Lisa Pandolfo,
Jonas Martin Panig,
Paul J. Pansini,
John M. Paulijo,
Edward Joseph Papa,
Salvatore T. Papaso,
James Nicholas Papa George,
Marie Papalardo,
Vinod Kumar Parakat,
Vijay Ashankar Paramsathi,
Nitin Ramesh Parankar,
and my uncle Alejandro Cordero. Even though your three nieces, Leah, Mila, and I, did not meet you, we still feel like you're here with us. We cherish you in our hearts forever, and we love you. You are dearly missed by Mama Tere, Papa Moises, your brothers, and the whole Cordero family. We love you.
and my father, Glenn Davis Kerwin. We love you. We miss you. You inspire me to wear the uniform every day. Gary Owen.
Accident, but certainly when the second plane hit, we knew, as Chief Donald Byrd said to me, we are at war. And those are some of the last words I ever heard him say. I was a witness to some of the greatest acts of heroism maybe this country's ever seen. The firefighters and police officers knew what they were going into. They spoke to me. My best friend Terry Hatton, my best friend Chris Blackwell said the words to me that it was very bad, really dangerous. Terry actually said to me, I love you, brother. I may never see you again. But you know what, Neil, he did? He still went in that stairwell, and he still went up. That is an example of the bravery of the 343 firefighters, the 37 Port Authority police officers, the 23 New York City police officers.
Incredible.
Heroes all. They knew it, but they still did it. And those acts of courage, to me, are the greatest acts of love I've seen in my life, because they were willing to give up their own lives for people they didn't know.
Well, I've often said it's in firefighters, police, Port Authority workers' DNA to be crazy brave. And I'm remembering quite vividly, the firefighters and others rushing into those buildings, even the second tower, when it looked problematic, to put it mildly, and all these other folks rushing out. They're climbing the stairs and all. They're going up, and they had to know this was a one-way trip, or could be, but they just wanted to get as many people out as possible. It's staggering.
They fulfilled the oath they took earlier when they became firefighters and police officers, because you say in that oath that you're willing to give up your life for your neighbor, and you just don't know when that will be called to pass, when you have to actually fulfill that oath. And that's what these heroes did that day, and we have to always remember them. We have to recite their names, and we have to teach our children about such courageous, brave men and women.
Did you ever rethink your profession after it?
No, I would do the same thing again.
I had a feeling you'd answer that. Every man and woman I talked to afterwards has said the exact same thing, Tim.
My niece and my nephew are both firefighters, carrying on the tradition. Even after what happened to me, I am very proud of them and what they've chosen to do with their lives.
Looking back at it now, God forbid if something like this ever happened again. There were talk of the communications. Firefighters couldn't talk with each other. Various departments couldn't talk to each other. I think that's been addressed and corrected. But, you know, it's easy to play Monday morning quarterback after a disaster like this. But are we technically up? Are you guys technically up? And are you trying to do the unthinkable?
I think it's better, but it's almost an unsolvable problem because we all need to be on the same radio so that if something happens, we can help each other.
Yeah.
So it's a very difficult problem to address successfully.
When you look back at that day, you talk about the 343 firefighters who were killed, most crushed when the buildings collapsed. But in the end, some of them, even risking that and knowing that there was a possibility because they saw the first tower collapse and that was a possibility, they were still, you know, looking for people. Did any of them, besides the one buddy, get back to you to say, all right, this doesn't look good?
Well, I'll address it with talking about Captain Billy Burke. And Billy was with a disabled man who was in a wheelchair. And Billy knew the North Tower or the South Tower had collapsed. He was in the north. And he sent his men out. He ordered his men to get out of the building, but he stayed with this gentleman in the wheelchair. He knew what was coming, but he stayed there with him. So that's another example of the courage and heroism and selflessness of the police officers and firefighters that day.
Tell me a little bit about what you're trying to do to sort of pay it forward, the 9/11 trail and some of the other things you're doing to look after folks.
Right. This is all part of the mantra, never forget, right? And there are 3 beautiful memorials at each location. But there's a 4th memorial now that I'm on the board of, and we're trying to get the word out. And it's beautiful. It is a 9/11 trail, and it connects Shanksville and the Pentagon and the World Trade Center.
Wow.
Bicycle path, running, hiking, and what we can do is get out on this trail, get the air in your lungs on your bicycle, go out with your children, and remember all these stories. And talk to your kids about them and teach them about all these stories of the innocent people who lost their lives in 2001. For me, after 9/11, music was my thing, music and getting outdoors. And so I would put Andrea Bocelli in my ears, my favorite, and he would bring...
You struck me first as a Rolling Stones guy. I wouldn't know. Very classic. All right.
Yeah. No, his voice spoke to me.
Absolutely.
And so getting out on that trail, you know, that's what I'm doing. I'm going to get out there with Bocelli in my ears and remember my friends.
What do you tell kids?
We tell them the whole story. The whole story is the heroes, which we spoke about, the innocent people, and the horror. And I'm sorry, but it's true. There was a lot of suffering. There was a lot of pain. And then we also have to remember who did this and why they did it to us. And that's the whole story. And we cannot forget any of those pieces.
You're absolutely right. Thank you.
Geared to his back and raced on foot through the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel to the Twin Towers, where he died saving others. Terry Sears is the executive director of Tuesday's Children. He joins us as well. She joins us as well. This nonprofit organization's goal is to provide a community for families who have suffered losses due to the 9/11 terrorist attacks. And Paul Washington is the captain of the FDNY Engine 234 Firehouse. He's a firefighter who served for over 30 years and has pushed for wider recognition of the 12 black firefighters who lost their lives helping others on 9/11. Thanks to all 3 of you for joining us.
First, I want to start with you. You've been on this walk for weeks now, and now here you are at Ground Zero. This is such an important day for you, for your family. How do you feel?
Well, I feel proud that I was able to honor my brother in a very respectful and meaningful way. I heard the president is going to go visit all 3 sites. I did also. I started 42 days ago. I started at the Pentagon. I walked from the Pentagon to Shanksville, Pennsylvania, laid a wreath at both places, said the Lord's Prayer at both places, and then walked here to New York City, finishing this morning when I retraced my brother's final heroic footsteps. Now, he ran through the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel 20 years ago with his fire gear on his back. That was the only way he could get there because it was closed for security reasons. He had a wife. He had 5 beautiful children. He gave it all. Our first responders that were running in that building, we can never forget the sacrifice they made. And I wanted to say thank you to my little brother who has inspired his older siblings to do good in his memory.
But that last mile, going through the tunnel, what was going through your mind? It's been a long 42 days.
I'm going to tell you what's going through my mind. Most everything. But I remember the day my brother was born. He's 14 years younger than me. He was our little brother, the youngest of 7. I remember my father coming to my school. I was in the 8th grade, and he said, "Frank, you have a new brother," and his tears were coming down his face. And then I remember after my parents died when he was a little boy, and he was orphaned by the age 10, and his older siblings had to raise him, most certainly my oldest brother, Russell, out in Rockville Center, and then came later with me and lived with me. And he grew up to be this dynamic human being, a firefighter, loved the brotherhood of a firefighter, strong person, wanted to do something for people and serve people, and he made the ultimate sacrifice. I couldn't be more proud to be Stephen Silla's older brother, who I look up to.
We're finding that opportunity today to find solace in all the heroes like your brother who ran toward this as people needed to run away from it. Captain Washington, thank you for being with us, and you are honoring a number of your FDNY colleagues who died. Hundreds died on that day, and hundreds have died since. And you are trying to draw attention particularly to the 12 black firefighters who died on 9/11.
Yes, certainly. First, thank you for having me. We honor all 343 firefighters who died. But the Vulcan Society organization in New York City's black firefighters, we particularly honor the 12 black firefighters because we feel that they haven't gotten the recognition that they should have gotten. After 9/11, we didn't see their stories portrayed often enough. We didn't hear their lives being talked about, and so we particularly honor those 12, and we'll be having a ceremony for them later this afternoon in Bedford-Stuyvesant, Brooklyn. And they were 12 really, really beautiful brothers. I knew all 12 of them, and they were great guys, just so full of life, so, such family men, people that you really could be proud of, and we couldn't be any prouder of them than we are. The sacrifices that they've made, and all 343, it enriches our lives as firefighters. One of the best things about being a firefighter is the respect that you get from the public. The public loves us, they respect us, and that respect makes our lives better. It gives you, it's very satisfying. And the reason why people respect us so much is because they know we do a dangerous job, and that sometimes we're called to make the ultimate sacrifice, which these men certainly did.
And Terry, of course, you have done a lot of work with the families of people who lost loved ones in 9/11. I want to hold on for a second to have that conversation with you, and I want to toss it to Andrea Mitchell and Hallie Jackson, who are at the Pentagon, where we are also commemorating this important day, and they've got an important guest with them.
Yeah. Allie and Steph, thank you so much. Yeah, we're here at the Pentagon where the formal ceremony has wrapped up. We will see President Biden, Vice President Harris here later on, late afternoon, early evening. We know President Biden is on his way to Shanksville, Pennsylvania now for a ceremony there. He is visiting all 3 sites today. I want to bring in somebody here who is joining us at our live shot from the Pentagon, John Brennan, the former CIA director, now an MSNBC senior national security and intelligence analyst. Director Brennan, thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Hallie.
Thank you so much. Director Brennan, when you think back 20 years ago, you spent so much time in Saudi Arabia. You were station chief for the CIA for years before you were in the White House as National Security Director and then CIA Director. How much safer are we now, given that Al-Qaeda and the Taliban are in charge of Afghanistan, and we can hit them from so-called over the horizon, 1,200 miles away, but we don't have boots on the ground?
Well, 9/11 was a galvanizing event for the U.S. government and for the American people in terms of trying to do everything possible to prevent a recurrence of those horrific attacks. And over the past 20 years, I think about the strength, the determination, the resilience of the military, of the intelligence officers and the law enforcement agents and others in diplomatic corps who have worked tirelessly to try to understand the nature of that threat and to do everything possible to mitigate it. So I do believe that we are, in fact, safer than we were back then, but that doesn't mean that the terrorists are not still out there. And I think in the light of what's happened in Afghanistan, we have to be particularly vigilant about efforts of Al-Qaeda, ISIS-K, and others to try to regenerate that capability to attack us here.
Can you talk about the current status?
Resta. Sylvia Sanpio Resta. Martha M. Reski. David E. Reddick. Todd H. Rubin. Luis Clodoaldo Revilla Mir. Eduviges Reyes Jr. Bruce Albert Reynolds. John Frederick Rhodes. Francis Severio Riccardelli. Rudolph N. Riccio. Anne Marie Riccoboni. David Harlow Rice. Eileen Mary Rice. Kenneth Frederick Rice III. Cecilia E. Richard. Vernon Allen Richard. And my father, Port Authority Police Officer Paul Lazinski. We miss you. We love you. Amy and I know that your grandchildren, Samantha, Jack, Lily, and Daphne, are all in the arms of an angel. God bless America. God bless our law enforcement.
And my husband, Stephen Goldstein. Steve, I still see your face every single day when I look at Hannah and Harris. They are the living representation of all that was good in you. We miss you and we love you.
Like, all right.
You can take it.
Can I go now?
David Richards.
Michael Richards.
Vanessa Orincia Richards.
Firefighter Jimmy Ritchies.
Alan J. Richmond.
John M. Rigo.
Frederick Charles Ramelli III.
Rose Mary Riso.
Moises N. Rivas.
Joseph R. Ravelli Jr.
Carmen Alicia Rivera.
Isaias Rivera.
Juan William Rivera.
Linda Evelise Rivera.
David E. Rivers.
Joseph R. Reverso.
Paul V. Rizza.
John Frank Rizzo.
Stephen Louis Roche.
Joseph Roberto.
Leo Arthur Roberts.
Michael E. Roberts.
Michael Edward Roberts.
Donald Walter Robertson Jr.
Jeffrey Robinson.
Michelle Lee Jean Robotham.
Donald Arthur Robson.
Antonio A. Rocha.
Raymond James Rocha.
Laura Rockefeller.
John Michael Rodock.
Antonio Jose Rodriguez.
Anthony Rodriguez.
Carmen Milagros Rodriguez.
Gregory E. Rodriguez.
Marsha A. Rodriguez.
Myra Valdez Rodriguez.
Richard Rodriguez.
David Bartolo Rodriguez Vargas.
And my brother, firefighter Gregory Thomas Saucedo, Ladder Company 5. Greg, we lived together 31 years. I didn't go more than 20 days without seeing each other. I love and I miss you. Can't believe it's 20 years.
And my uncle and godfather, Richard Joseph Cadena. You are missed by all, loved by everyone, and your memories are what keep us laughing, believing, and living as if we were to live 100 years but die tomorrow. Keep showing us signs. We need them always. We love and miss you. God bless America.
Matthew Rogan.
And watching here, it's been a very emotional morning here at Ground Zero, as so many families coming in person here to Ground Zero to pay tribute, tearful tribute in so many cases, to the loved ones that they lost 20 years ago today. You know, it's been a reminder that this wasn't just a national tragedy, Jake. It was a deeply personal one for so many of these family members, as we've heard fathers and sisters and mothers and brothers and cousins and nephews talk about their loved ones and bring them back to life, to talk about what their laughs sounded like, talk about what their personalities were like, talk about what their lives were like while they were living here on Earth. As I mentioned, just so much emotion here in the day, even from children, grandchildren who never met the people that they were grieving and yet have heard so much about these people for the last 20 years. It's also been a story of just immense heroic actions and bravery in the face of the unthinkable. We heard from a father talk about his daughter, Sarah Lowe, who was a flight attendant on Flight 11 that hit one of these towers. And we heard so much from family members about just sort of the everyday grief that they've been facing, grief that they carry with them as if it was just so fresh, as if they just received the news. As you mentioned, President Biden was here in attendance along with a host of other dignitaries, but really the centerpiece of the day, Jake, has been about the families, what they've lost. We're now some 4 hours into this service. It's still ongoing back here, and they're still reading the names, almost a temporal reminder of, if you will, of the loss of nearly 3,000 people, Jake.
All right, Laura Jarrett, thank you so much. CNN's Paula Reed is live for us in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, not far from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, the western part of the state, where President Biden has just arrived. Paula, tell us what you've seen.
Really an incredible tribute here today at the National Memorial to Flight 93. Of course, Flight 93 was one of the 4 commercial airliners hijacked on 9/11, but it did not reach its intended target, which is believed to have been the U.S. Capitol, because the 40 passengers and crew members aboard that flight banded together and stormed the cockpit. So instead of crashing in Washington, D.C., that flight crashed here in a field in rural Pennsylvania. And it is that unity that has really been the theme here today. Vice President Kamala Harris and former President George W. Bush both gave remarks in tribute to the lives lost. And I think it's really going to be the former president's remarks that people are really going to be talking about, because he touched on this idea of unity and the unity that he saw when he was leading the country in the days following 9/11. And he also said specifically that he believes that the threat of domestic terror, domestic extremism, is just as significant as any foreign extremist threat. An apparent reference, of course, to the January 6th insurrection. Now, Vice President Kamala Harris, she also sees on this theme of unity and how it was really embodied by the collective action of those aboard Flight 93. Now, as you may or may not be able to see behind me, all these chairs are empty, and that is because at the conclusion of this memorial, they actually opened a ceremonial gate for family members and friends of those who were lost to go and visit the crash site. And Jake, that's so poignant because it has really been the family members and the friends who have been fighting to get this memorial. Some of them believe that what happened here in Shanksville is often forgotten in the larger conversation about 9/11, that most of the attention is on the World Trade Center or on the Pentagon. And they have been fighting for years to create this memorial, and it's finally finished. And it is quite remarkable. The National Park Service oversees this center, and you can come here and learn more about the sacrifices that were made and arguably the lives that were saved that day. Now, President Biden has just arrived. He is not expected to give remarks, but he is expected to lay a wreath. And it's notable that the only current or former president we will hear from today is, of course, former President George W. Bush, who was leading the country on 9/11. And his remarks today, incredibly poignant, and I think a lot of people are going to be talking about them in the days to come.
All right, Paula Reed in Shanksville, Pennsylvania.
Thick fortress walls.
Hernando Rafael Salas.
Juan G. Salas.
Esmerlin Antonio Salcedo.
John Pepe Salerno.
Rama Sally and her unborn child.
Richard L. Salinardi Jr.
Wayne John Salomon.
Norbert Salomon.
Catherine Patricia Salter.
Frank G. Salvatierra.
Paul Richard Salvio.
And my aunt Gavharai Kamardinova. Not a day goes by without you being missed and loved. I've never gotten to meet you, but I'm sure we would have gotten along so well with you as my aunt. You have gone too soon, but the memory of you will forever be in our hearts.
And my husband, Michael Joseph Zinzi. Your family and friends love you and miss you. Your mom is now reunited with you. Please continue to watch over our 20-year-old son, Dean Michael. He is just like you in many ways. He is amazing. Love you, and God bless America.
John P. Sammartino.
James Kenneth Samuel Jr.
Michael San Philip.
Hugo M. Sané.
Alva Cynthia Jeffries Sanchez.
Jacqueline Patrice Sanchez.
Jesus Sanchez.
Raymond Sanchez.
Eric M. Sand.
Stacy Leigh Sanders.
Herman S. Sandler.
Jim Sanders Jr.
Aileen J. Santiago.
Kirsten Reese Santiago.
Maria Teresa Conception Santillan.
Susan Gail Santo.
Christopher A. Santora.
John August Santor.
Mario L. Santoro.
Rafael Umberto Santos.
Rufino C. F. Santos III.
Victor J. Saraceni.
Kalyan K. Sakar.
Chappelle Renee Stewart Sarker.
Paul F. Sarl.
Deepika Kumar Satalore.
Gregory Thomas Cicedo.
Susan M. Sauer.
Anthony Savas.
Vladimir Savakin.
John Michael Scarborough.
David M. Scales.
Robert Louis Scandol.
Michelle Scarapita.
Dennis Scalzo.
John Albert Shart.
John G. Scharf.
Said Fred C. Sheffield Jr.
Angela Susan Scheinberg.
Scott Mitchell Schertzer.
Sean Shelke.
Stephen Francis Schlag.
Robert A. Schlegel.
John Schissel.
Karen Helene Schmidt.
Ian Schneider.
Thomas G. Scholes.
Frank G. Schott Jr.
Gerard Patrick Schrang.
Jeffrey H. Schreier.
John T. Schroeder.
Susan Lee Laspa Schuler.
Edward W. Shunk.
Mark Evan Schermeyer.
John Burkhart Schwartz.
Mark Schwartz.
Adrian Victoria Civetta.
Raphael Skorka.
And my father, Angel Penna.
And my father, Arthur Warren Scullin, Vietnam veteran, Cmgus Da Nang, Executive Tax Director, Marcia McClellan, member of the Ancient Order of Hibernians, whose 18 members were lost on September 11th, proud son, loving husband, proud father, uncle, and cousin, defender of the faith, and good friend. And on this day, as I said to my loving son Ethan and Maureen last night, do not grieve, for we all shine on like the moon and the stars and the sun. Thank you.
Local police departments, the FBI, the CIA, I could go on. And he wanted to improve that. And his big push was communicate with local police departments. If you know of questionable characters in a certain area, share it with the, in this case, the New York police chief or whatever, and vice versa. Did that improve in the 2002, 3, 4 period?
Oh, yes. I think it came out quickly that one of the issues here was that the FBI and the CIA were not coordinating. Everybody knew that. So they knew the mandate was to share communication. We added 100 detectives to the FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force to sort of force that communication, that collaboration. And I think it certainly happened. And now you've got, I think the FBI might have as many as 70 Joint Terrorism Task Forces throughout the country. All of them involve local police agencies. That's their goal, to get that communication going. We started fusion centers, again, aimed at sharing information. And I can assure you that it's much better now, certain than it was in 2001, but much better than maybe 10 years ago, 5 years ago.
But we're never danger-free. I think people forget that, don't they?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There are no guarantees. You can do all of these things, bring in all the technology, put people overseas, all of that stuff, but we are vulnerable. This is the most important target in the world. They want to come back to New York. They want to kill people. I mean, it's stark reality of it. It's a poorest city. We have 10 million people a day here. We had them before coronavirus.
Right.
So,
but you know, Commissioner, a lot of those people don't want to come back after the pandemic, and it isn't so much about the virus. Local polls in this city say it's about the crime and the safety issue. Eric Adams, the leading Democratic mayoral candidate, and if Curtis Lee has anything to say about that, and we'll be talking to him later, he doesn't think that's going to happen, but that this reflects the concern people have about their safety. Does that surprise you?
I think particularly in the subways. I just saw something where ridership in Lower Manhattan is down 82%. That's an incredible number.
Right.
We have to get people back on those trains. It's the lifeblood of the city. We need police officers on platforms. We need to raise that comfort level that people have been.
But it's not happening. So we don't see that at all.
We have to keep working at it because it's so important, the city. You can go to Midtown and you'll see there's not many people on the streets in
You're right.
Midtown.
You're right.
Something's got to change.
Got it. Commissioner, always good seeing you. Ray Kelly, thank you very, very much.
Thanks a lot.
You haven't really gotten old. I was hoping that you'd show up really old looking, but you look the same. All right. Ray Kelly, former New York Police Commissioner. Let's go back down to Ground Zero, as they used to call it, and remember the people who used to work there.
They are so much like you. I can still feel you watching over us. I will love you forever.
And my father, Joseph P. McDonald. I miss you every day and wish you were here to experience all of life's moments with me. I miss your smile, your hugs, and your never-ending jokes. 7 years was not enough time together, but I'm grateful for my memories of you and the stories that I hear about you from my family members, which make me feel like you're still here. I love you, and I try my best to live up to your legacy every day.
Michael.
Around the country and keeping them in the air, keeping them safe. And Mr. Card was right there with us in the cockpit telling us what's the latest, what's happening. So we were getting great information. It's just we were getting quite a bit of information.
Tell me a bit. I want to get into your head at that point. Obviously, you're military trained. You
But
know
I
how
want
to
to know
do that.
he's on the tarmac.
Right.
He's waiting for the president to set foot on Air Force One. What are you feeling?
You know, our plan was the moment the president would arrive, the plane's ready to go, we're going to get him in the air, and then we're going to take the president to some location. We always thought we were trained for that. And then we get the word we're going back to Washington, D.C., which is perfectly fine. Fog of war is coming into play at this point. We're hearing that there's truck bombs that have hit the Pentagon. There's bombing going on in the Capitol area. So it sounded like a ground attack and an air attack. So as a military man, I was hesitant to bring the president back into that area. But that was exactly what was desired at that point. And we made everything happen to make sure it was safe. And Mr. Card was with us explaining what's going on and how we're going to execute. And the beauty of the whole day was Mr. Card, the president, everyone gave us not only information, but they asked our opinion. And they got the opinions of everyone around them. And we're all opening up our toolkits and giving them exactly what we know and how we can help.
We're just showing you some pictures of Shanksville right now. The president is going to be there. This is going to be part of the third ceremony today, honoring those who died. That's where United Flight 93 went down. A story and heroism all of its own. We'll take you there in just a moment. Andy Card, I don't know of a chief of staff in history who has ever had to deliver that kind of message with that kind of urgency, not being in a secure room, not being in a place where all cards are on the table, there's military people, you can say what you need to say.
You're in a classroom.
We're in the classroom. So how do you choose those words, and what do you think the president was going to do with that information?
I had no idea what the president would do. I did wrestle myself with, do I ask him to leave or not leave? Right. I made a decision just to give him the information, step back from him so he didn't have a conversation with him.
Fast. I mean, you delivered your stuff and then you got out.
And I stepped back on purpose to send the signal that I didn't want to have him start a conversation.
Got it.
And now, if he had gotten up, I probably would have said, that means he wants to come with me. I did not want him to get up because I wanted to get things ready for him in the holding room. So I was relieved with how he reacted. I was comforted that he didn't scare the kids. I was comforted he didn't demonstrate fear to the media, and because that would have satisfied the terrorists. But I was also comforted that he was contemplating his act. If I thought he was in immediate danger, the Secret Service would have come in with me and lifted him out of the chair. And that probably would have scared the kids.
I've always wondered, when did you get to call home? Every time I've ever had the pleasure of interviewing you, you always have your #1 partner with you, your wife.
My wife?
For the rest of us, as soon as those towers hit, we hunkered down, we called our families. Did you get to do that?
I did not. I did not talk to my wife until I got home that night at about midnight. And my wife is a minister. Her church at the time was right near the CIA. She was worried about her parishioners, many of whom worked at the Pentagon or at the CIA. And she was there with their families. She actually opened up the parking lot of the church so that the CIA could use it because they were calling in people to work. But she had confidence in me. I have great confidence in her. And we love each other. We were empty nesters, so our children were all gone and out of the house. If we had had children at home, it would have been a very different circumstance. But I was completely focused on the president and helping him. I wanted to be cool, calm, and collected and not be a source of angst.
Right.
Now, he did get angry with me every time he would say, we're going back to Washington, D.C., and I would say, I don't think you want to make the decision right now. Let's wait. And he would argue and argue, and I'd say, Mark, our pilot says he's not going to fly you there until he knows he can land the plane. And he was a blessing to me because he said, he may be the president, but I'm in charge of this plane and I'm not going to do anything.
Did that day change your relationship and your relationship with the president forever?
Yeah, it did, absolutely. I mean, it was, definitely always a respect for the President of the United States and the Chief of Staff. But that day, I mean, the whole crew, everybody came together with the first family as well as the staff. And from that moment forward, it was, you can't go into Baghdad unannounced without the support of the President and the Chief of Staff and know you're going to be supported. So that day, we all came together as a family. It was incredible in my mind.
Well, thank you both for in the moment having to make very, very tough decisions and doing them well. Stay with us for a second. I want to go to Jeff Bennett. Jeff is in Shanksville for us right now, which is the next event today. Jeff, what's the situation there?
I'll tell you what, Allie, the Shanksville this morning and afternoon certainly belies what happened here some 20 years ago. This really is a place of peace today, as you can sort of see the sun reflect off the hemlocks here behind me. On the other side of the screen, we're awaiting President Biden to walk through that black curtain there as he's going to pay his respects at the memorial wall. There are 40 stone pillars for each of the 40 victims. The president and the first lady are going to lay a wreath. We're getting some sort of emergency alert here in Shanksville. We'll find out what that's all about. But the president and first lady will lay a wreath. And of course, as you know, they have been present at each of the 3 sites, and that's one of the reasons why the president isn't delivering remarks today. The priority for the White House is to make sure that he's available and present to the families to the degree that is possible, both here in Shanksville, at the Pentagon, and at the site there at 9/11. I want to bring in my friend and colleague, NPR's Scott Detrow, who's... Go ahead, Allie, I'm sorry.
No, please go ahead. Bring Scott in.
Yeah, I want to bring Scott in because Scott has done extensive reporting on the degrees to which this land, this pastoral acreage.
Larry L. Strickland.
Stephen F. Strovert.
Walwyn Wellington Stewart, Jr.
Benjamin Suarez.
David Scott Suarez.
Ramon Suarez.
Dino Xavier Suarez Ramirez.
Yoichi Sumiyama Suyama.
William Christopher Sugra.
Daniel Thomas Suhr.
David Mark Sullins.
Christopher P. Sullivan.
Patrick Sullivan.
Thomas G. Sullivan.
Hilario Serranio Sumaya, Jr.
James Joseph Suazo.
And my aunt, Amy Nicole Jarrett, who was funny, outgoing, and always kept the family together. I was only 1 week old when my aunt passed away, but I honor you every single day with my name that you gave to me when I was born. You are my hero and the bravest person I've known. We love and we miss you.
And my father, Richard N. Polis, and my uncle, James P. Hopper. 20 years ago today, I went to school that beautiful morning, never anticipating the horror that was to come to my family and so many others. I've lived almost half of my life since then, and it has been bittersweet. My dad and uncle have missed so much. Our family has grown. My father didn't get to see my nephews grow into the amazing young men they are today, and he didn't get to witness the birth of my 2 nieces and my 2 daughters. It's heartbreaking they'll never get to hear his laugh. I often wonder what nicknames he would have given them. My uncle now has 2 grandsons and 2 granddaughters that will never get to enjoy him as their grandpa. Daddy and Uncle Jimmy, your absence is felt so much more as time passes. We long to hear you both laughing and joking. There is a giant hole in our family without you both. We all love and miss you more than I can ever put into words.
Colleen M. Sapinski.
Robert Sutcliffe.
Celine Sutter.
Claudia Suzette Sutton.
John Francis Swain.
Christine M. Swearson.
Brian David Sweeney.
Brian Edward Sweeney.
Madeline Amy Sweeney.
Kenneth J. Swenson.
Thomas F. Swift.
Derek Ogilvy Sword.
Kevin Thomas Sozik.
Gina Steinberg.
Norbert P. Sikorsky.
Harry Tabak.
Joanne C. Tabik.
Norma C. Tadai.
Michael Tadonio.
Keishiro Takahashi.
KG Takahashi.
Phyllis Gail Talbot.
Robert R. Tahami.
John Talagnani.
Sean Patrick Talon.
Paul Talty.
Marita Tam.
Rachel Tamares.
Hector Rogan Tamayo.
Michael Andrew Tamuccio.
Kaneshiro Tanaka.
Rondell Sherry Tankard.
Michael Anthony Tanner.
Dennis Gerard Taramina, Jr.
Kenneth Joseph Tarantino.
Alan Tarasevich.
Michael C. Tarot.
Ronald Tartero.
Deborah Tarolarella.
Darrell Anthony Taylor.
Donnie Brooks Taylor.
Hilda E. Taylor.
Kip P. Taylor.
Leonard E. Taylor. Larissa Salone Taylor. Michael Morgan Taylor. Sandra C. Taylor. Sandra Dawn Teague. Carol W. T.P. Paul A. Techtmeyer. Yashavan Moshwar Tembe. Anthony Tempesta. Dorothy Pearl Temple. Stanley L. Temple. David Gustav Peter Tingelin. Brian John Terenzi. Lisa Marie Terry. Gumati Thakardeen. Harsha Sham Tate. Michael Theodoridis. And my brother Angel Perez. We continue to mourn our lost ones as it was that horrific day 20 years ago, September 11, 2001. Our loved ones have left with us precious memories which we shared together. My brother Angel, I know that you received my mom with open arms. Angels, I see you in my dreams next to Mom. Angel, I hear your laughter in my sons. Sebastian, and your smile and big hearts will live with us forever in our hearts. God bless the fallen troops who fought for our nations and continue to fight. There will never be closure as we live to remember until we meet again. And my cousin, Michael R. Wittenstein, Zichrono Livracha. Michael, you live on in the lives and hearts and minds of everyone whose lives you touched. May your memory be a blessing.
That's President Biden and First Lady Jill Biden walking in a field outside Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Shanksville, of course, famously where Flight 93 went down. Passengers and crew members wresting control from the terrorists on 9/11, a plane that almost certainly was intended to crash into the U.S. Capitol, killing an unknown number of people. Those passengers gave their lives so that others might live. Jeff Zeleny joins us now from the White House. And Jeff, obviously, President Biden is from Pennsylvania. He's from Scranton. And it was important for him to be in this field today. The citizens of Shanksville and the family members of those lost on Flight 93 sometimes feel as though they are forgotten.
Without a question, Jay, because simply Shanksville is out of the way. It's a rural location, but as you said, so critical to the tragic story of September 11th, which would have been almost certainly far more tragic. That is what the terrorists intended, was for that plane to come here to the nation's capital, likely the U.S. Capitol, as the 9/11 report said, but possibly also here at the White House. It was unclear what the actual target was, but again, most people think it was the U.S. Capitol, where, of course, the death toll would have been much higher. But we've seen President Biden visit Shanksville several times, but the first time now as president, you can see him walking through the field, walking toward the rock there at the Flight 93 Memorial, which is a national park. So this is not, this is familiar ground to him. We're told he is also going to be laying a wreath in memory of one passenger in particular on the flight who called his wife as they were getting ready to make their attack. The passengers were getting ready to push back against the terrorists. So he'll be laying a wreath there. Of course, he's walking with his wife, Dr. Jill Biden. And then he also will be coming back to Washington and going to the Pentagon. So visiting all three spots on this day. And Jake, we should point out that Joe Biden, of course, was a longtime senator at this point, 20 years ago. He had just become chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee earlier that summer. So on that evening, he had a secure military line installed into his Delaware home. That's when he started getting these secure briefings. He spoke with President Bush on that day as well, urging him to come back to Washington. Joe Biden, at the time, Senator, played a key role in the beginning of the war on terrorism. He supported the war, the fight against Afghanistan and Iraq. And of course, then he became one of the longest and loudest critics. So, Jake, the bookend here is really impossible to script, that President Biden would be the commander-in-chief to end America's longest war in a controversial way. And now, of course, he was there at the beginning. But let's pause on that for a moment and just watch what we are watching there in the field. As President Biden, as every leader has to do, play the role of comforter-in-chief, consoler. That is certainly what he's doing, and it was important for him to go to Shanksville. And Jake, we saw him talking about unity. The words of unity from former President George W. Bush also echoing loudly there. So the two didn't speak today as far as we know, but remarkable how similar their messages were.
All right, Jeff Zeleny, thanks so much. We're just taking in some of the sounds and the silence, really, from Shanksville and that field where so many dozens of Americans gave their lives to protect other Americans. That plane was intended, it is now believed, for the U.S. Capitol. And Garrett Graff, you're with me. One of the things about the story of Shanksville is it's not just a story of heroism, and it's not just a forgotten part of the story. I mean, the people of Pennsylvania and the families of those survivors, I mean, of the families of those who perished on Flight 93 often feel as though, because this took place in a rural area of Pennsylvania and not in the media center of Washington, D.C. or New York City like the Pentagon and World Trade Center attacks, it doesn't get the same attention. But the story of what happened in Shanksville, it doesn't end on September 11th, 2001. In some ways, it begins.
Yeah, and this is where you sort of see this disconnect in the way that we even memorialize this crash, that we talk of it as Shanksville. Shanksville is not where United Airlines Flight 93 actually crashed. It struck in Stony Creek Township, which is just north of Shanksville. And this is really the story of all of Somerset County, all of the small communities that are called together to respond to that crash out of nowhere. I mean, remember in New York, the terrorists strike one of the best prepared fire departments in the country. In Arlington, one of the best prepared fire departments in the country. In Stony Creek Township, you actually see volunteer EMS, volunteer first responders pulling up. One of the first fire trucks that arrives at that field that morning is actually an uncle and a nephew together, a family responding from their own homes. And that this is a story that we see of this community really wondering why they have been pushed to the fore of this dramatic national story. One of the most amazing interviews I've ever had of someone responding to 9/11 was Sergeant Denise Miller, who was with the Indian Lake Police Department, one of those small communities in Somerset County, ends up there in the first couple of minutes after the crash that morning, and she spends her morning there looking up at the sky, terrified, looking for more planes coming to attack this field in Pennsylvania. Because all she knows during the 10 a.m. hour of Tuesday, September the 11th, is that 2 planes struck the World Trade Center, a 3rd hit the Pentagon, and a 4th hit this field. And so she assumes that there is some secret government facility under this field that she doesn't know about, that this must be one of the most important targets in the entire country. And so she assumes, just like the Twin Towers, there are more hijacked planes coming to blow up this field. And it sounds crazy when I tell it 20 years later, But when we talk about the confusion, the fear, the trauma of that day, it actually makes an incredible amount of sense, because if you only know what she knows during the 10 a.m. hour, you think that this field, this abandoned coal mine in Somerset County, is one of the most important places in the world.
It makes perfect sense, actually. It doesn't sound crazy at all, especially if you know so little, as so many of us did. We had no idea what was going on, where it was coming from, what was next. Caitlin Collins also joins me right now to talk about President Biden's trip to this memorial. And this memorial has been decades in the making, Caitlin, but I understand going there was very important to President Biden and First Lady Biden. And in fact, it's not the first time they've been there.
No, it's not. It's somewhere that we've seen actually President Biden speak before, commemorating the 9/11 attacks, of course, before he was actually the commander-in-chief, Jake. And so when we talked to aides this week at the White House about what exactly his plan was for 9/11, how he was going to mark the 20th anniversary of these attacks, they talked about this desire to go to all three of them. But I think one thing that's clear is you're not hearing the president deliver a set of remarks today. And the White House said that was because they wanted to let each of these events really speak for themselves and let the moment and the focus be on, of course, those lives that we lost and the families of these victims today. And so that's why you're not actually hearing from President Biden himself today. He did record a video that the White House released last night. And in that video, he tried to take it as a bigger picture of 9/11, Jake, and talk about what he thinks the country is lacking, which is what we heard from brother of one of the victims on Flight 93, talking about the sacrifices that they made and how incredible they were, big sacrifices, small sacrifices, and asking, kind of this thought-provoking question earlier where he said, are we worth it? Do we deserve that sacrifice that they made? And I think in President Biden's speech, he was kind of going back to a bigger point, talking about the lack of unity in the country. And of course, that's on display today. And it really makes you remember just what kind of unity you saw on September 11th when these attacks had first happened.
And Caitlin, we're expecting President Biden to next head to the Pentagon, to the memorial there. Walk us through what we're expecting him to do there.
Yeah, so they'll finish with this ceremony here in Shanksville, and then the president will make his way over to the Pentagon, where we just left. They're actually preparing it for his arrival right now. The vice president will be there as well, and you'll see the president and the first lady. They'll do a wreath-laying ceremony at the Pentagon as well, of course, for the lives that were lost there. And so you will see the president make this full circle of the site of the attacks, and then he'll go back to the White House after that, starting his day in New York and then making his way to Shanksville, of course, where he is now, and then going to the Pentagon. And we were talking about where he was on that day. He was here in Washington as chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee on Capitol Hill, trying to go to his Senate office and talking about how he, like so many other people, have that experience of what happened that day and what it looked like for him, trying to restore normalcy, trying to have a sense of calm and collectedness when that was anything but what people were feeling in that moment. As Garrett was just talking about what the woman in Pennsylvania felt, this fear of the unknown, given the unbelievable had just happened. And so I think that's really what you've seen in this message from President Biden today, and seeing him there earlier in New York, standing alongside several of the former presidents as well as they were marking this moment, because it is something that, of course, has touched every presidency since George W. Bush. It is something that will touch every other presidency that follows it. But of course, President Biden, in a significant way, given the way that the troop levels have happened in Afghanistan, his need he felt to pull troops out of there is really something that he wanted to happen by this anniversary. That was his initial deadline that he had set in May for that withdrawal. And I think you really see the symbolism in that as well.
All right, Caitlin Collins, thank you so much. Coming up next, one of Rudy Giuliani's former speechwriters who was there on 9/11 will join us live to discuss, and country star Alan Jackson reflecting on the timeless song he wrote after the attacks that actually mentions CNN, incidentally. Stay with us.
Eye contact, elbow.
Here as to whether Marcus Alonso can continue.
That's because one thing, David, they know. 9/11 represented an utter failure of the federal law enforcement community. The one thing the federal government is supposed to do is to protect the people. On that day, they did not.
Pierre Thomas with us.
just as he has been for many, many years. And one of the things Pierre reminded us of is when he was in here reporting in this studio in New York 20 years ago with Peter Jennings, that the moment the towers began to come down, it was such a profound moment that Peter signaled to everyone, we should stop talking. We have to let America watch what is actually happening, because this is profound and heavy. And the country and the world changed in those moments. And I thought it was important to mention that Pierre remembers that moment too.
Oh, Pierre has been there these last 20 years in various ways in covering what we experienced. But there is something, and I think when people are, we're seeing the towers that are struck and collapsing, how quickly, you know, it seems like it was like such a long period of time. But the fact that the first tower that was struck was the last tower to go down, 102 minutes. In 102 minutes, all of that happened.
It's just extraordinary. And Pierre, I gather you still remember that moment, sitting next to Peter and understanding the gravity of what it was you were witnessing.
David, Peter seemed to know intuitively there were no words. No words to describe something that seemed biblical in nature. The way that the tower came down, the way that that debris and all the smoke just flowed through the city. It was something that no one could fathom, and it was beyond emotional. And I just remember just wanting to do a good job and to report what the FBI was telling me, and they were reacting with utter fear. And as the day went on, fury. They knew they had a lot to answer for, but they knew that they had to get onto the job of finding out who did this. And they told me that the flight manifest of those planes would be the key to getting the names and finding out who directed the attacks.
And I know, thank you, Pierre, I know they wouldn't want our thanks, but Robin, it's an opportunity for you and I to thank Diane, to thank Charlie Gibson, who is still a dear friend of ours, and of course the late Peter Jennings, because America does remember their role on that day too in helping us to get through it.
And I remember being on a flight shortly thereafter, and a flight attendant said that Charlie and Diane comforted them, brought them actually comfort, hearing them and helping them understand what was going on that day. And Martha, you know, on the heels of what Pierre Thomas was just saying, you're there at the Pentagon, and that's when we went to war. I mean, it was hit there, it was personal in so many ways, and I remember when President Bush, he said he was flying back in to D.C., and for him to see the Pentagon, and as you told us earlier, your husband was there. So it is something that even 20 years later is still at the forefront in your mind, in the minds of many, right?
It is, and looking at General Milley today and Defense Secretary Austin deliver speeches at the Pentagon, it was so profound because those men's worlds have revolved around war in the last 20 years. I think I've seen them in every war zone in Iraq and Afghanistan over those 20 years, and the loss. I walked through the memorials at the Pentagon after the commemoration ended and talked to a lot of people who were there, and there was one man who had rescued another man, a survivor, from the Pentagon, and they were both talking to me about the continuum of loss, not just those who died in the towers and in Shanksville and at the Pentagon, but those who went to war for our country. In Afghanistan, 2,461 American service members were lost, and thousands of contractors, and of course tens of thousands of civilians over those years, that continuum of loss. And I also have a friend, her name is Heather Penny. She was a fighter pilot on September 11th, 2001, a 26-year-old fighter pilot who was sent up. They didn't have weapons on the jets. She was ready to ram her jet and sacrifice her life to stop a commercial airliner at that point if one more had headed towards Washington. And she had some thoughts today, which I find uplifting. She said that day revealed to us the true greatness and character of the American spirit. Ordinary, everyday Americans were true heroes in the face of unspeakable horror. Yet today, we live in an America bombarded by angry partisan rhetoric. We are a nation divided. How can any hero come from that? But she said the legacy of 9/11 should not be trauma, fear, and hate. We witnessed better than that in the heroes of that day. Let us live into their legacy, their spirit. Beautifully said, Heather Penny.
Hear, hear. Beautifully said indeed.
Let Heather's words
you,
be
Martha.
heard by everybody watching. Martha, our thanks to you. And, you know, Martha talks about the long war and the loss of life. And, of course, we honor all of those young men and women who defended their country in the wake of 9/11, inspired by the darkness of that day. And it's interesting to watch President Biden now paying his respects in Shanksville. President Bush earlier at sort of both ends of the war in Afghanistan. There'll be plenty of time to debate the politics of that war, how it started, how it ended. But the fact that they both are paying tribute today in that same place should be a reminder to this country that the message of unity should be the most important message of all today. And I want to bring in Terry Moran. He was covering President Bush at the time. Secret Service sent them out of the White House.
Of sewing and quilting.
Today, partly cloudy. High 83. Winds east-northeast at 10 to 20 miles per hour.
Yuguan Zhang.
Evelyn Zeminski.
Michael Joseph Zinzi.
Charles Allen Zion.
Julie Lynn Zipper.
Salvatore J. Zizza.
Procopius Paul Zoyce.
Joseph J. Zukala.
Andrew Stephen Zucker.
Igor Zuckelman.
And my cousins Roshan Ramesh Singh and Kamlade Kami Singh, who are both brothers and sisters, and my uncle Amarnath Lachman. It's been 20 years, but there's not a day that goes by that we do not think of you. We miss your smiles, your laughter, your hugs, and the joy that you brought to our families. We love you and until we meet again. Thank you.
And my brother Nicholas, losing him has left a hole that nothing can replace. And thank you to the people of New York for giving the families this beautiful space where we can honor and remember our loved ones.
Michael Edward Asher. Scott Walter Cahill. Michael Scott Carlo. Terrell Coleman. Michael L. Collins. Linda M. Colin. Stephen Glick. Peter Gerard Galinas. Teresa M. Martin. Daniel R. Nolan. Norman S. Rosenow. And my brother, my little brother, Stephen Gerard Hoffman. You loved and lived in a big way. May we never forget.
You on sewing with
Taliban again controls Afghanistan right now.
And taps is used to conclude the ceremony here today in New York, where the nearly 3,000 names of those who were killed on 9/11 have been read by family members. And if you were listening this morning, not just reading the names, but of course the personal reflections on those who died on 9/11, and it was hard not to grab a Kleenex many times listening to how much grief still pervades many of these families who miss their loved ones. Want to check in with CBS's Nicole Killian. She has been in Shanksville, Pennsylvania all morning, where Flight 93 crashed after passengers overpowered the hijackers there, preventing a much larger tragedy in the nation's capital. And Nicole, tell us about the ceremony there and the remarks by President Bush.
Well, Nora, President Biden and the First Lady actually just left the memorial a short time ago. They laid a wreath and also met briefly with the families heading out to the point of impact where Flight 93 eventually came down. In an earlier ceremony, we also heard from Vice President Harris and former President George W. Bush, who spoke very poignantly and candidly about how this country has changed over the past 20 years. He talked about that day 20 years ago, saying that the actions of an enemy revealed the spirit of a people, and we were proud of a wounded nation. But he went on to talk about how divided he feels this nation has become, that these maligned forces have turned every argument and disagreement into a clash of cultures. There were about 500 people here today, a mix of family members and invited guests, one of the largest observances they've ever had here. Many of those families, Nora, telling me they are very mixed with emotions on this day, but hope that the legacy of Flight 93 carries on.
Nicole Killian, who has been there in Shanksville for us. Thank you so much, Nicole. And here with us all this morning, John Dickerson and Margaret Brennan. And, you know, John, it was difficult to listen to many of these families, but also they spoke so lovingly about how loved ones, their brothers, lived out loud and taught them to live out loud.
Well, you know, for such a sad day, so many of the recollections were about the laughter. And when you think about, one of the things that 9/11 did was it caused everybody who was touched by this, which is to say everybody in America, to think about how they would sum up their lives. And that's what we heard today. These memorial pools where the water disappears out of sight are designed to make absence visible. And that's what today did. It's what does this absence look like in the lives of these people left behind? And it was striking to hear some who were born after the attacks, the 100 children who were born to parents who died on that day who had not yet been born, talking about their parents, talking about them and saying the light of their loved ones still shined in their eyes.
And that many of them looked like their parents who they lost, or uncles and aunts who were lost on that day. Margaret?
And that's the uplifting part of this, that pierce, that overwhelming sorrow I think we all feel on this day. To hear, just tearing up, this little girl talk about her 27-year-old uncle who perished in those towers and how he inspires her to go on to be a fireman. To President Bush, who said, you know, calling back on the better angels of our nature to remind us that after 9/11, he reiterated Islam as a religion of peace, that he reiterated this country welcomed immigrants and refugees, reminding us of the character and linking it to what happened there in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, too, when he said, I saw America welcome them. A random group of Americans on board that flight is an exceptional group of people. And maybe that's what sits with us at the end of these 20 years, that call to try to be that exceptional character that he is speaking of, and sort of almost as if it has passed, and trying to recall it now into our politics, into our nature, and to memorialize the lives, but what they meant and the spirit that they had.
I was struck by that same thing. As America was united in remembrance, they were also united in grief 20 years ago. And as I was reflecting on this day too, I was thinking about those people that you mentioned, the exceptional character of people who ran toward the fire, who ran to help, the firefighters who went up the stairs, you know, all those who joined the military after 9/11, the passengers on Flight 93 that stormed that cockpit, and then, of course, the 2 F-16 pilots that I interviewed this week, the story I didn't know about, who actually got up in their F-16s. They were not armed, their planes, and they were going to essentially ram a commercial airliner to take it down and save our nation's capital. Those selfless acts of sacrifice are sort of what I'm thinking about today. We call them heroes, but they're everyday Americans, as the President Bush mentioned today, and that's what's great about this country, that terrorists tried to take away and did not take away that day.
And that there's that reservoir in character throughout the whole country.
John and Margaret, it's always nice to spend a day like this with the both of you. Thank you. Thanks to everyone at CBS News who, along with us, tried to remember everyone on 9/11 and those who have paid the ultimate sacrifice. We should mention that tomorrow night, 60 Minutes will mark the 20th anniversary of 9/11 with a full hour recalling the courageous efforts of firefighters here at Ground Zero. Scott Pelley has done an incredible job, and coverage of 9/11 20 years later will continue on our streaming service, CBSN. This has been a CBS News special report. I'm Norah O'Donnell in New York. Thank you for joining us, and never forget.
20 years feels like an eternity, but yet it still feels like yesterday.
We love and miss you every day. You will never be forgotten.
We still work here. We still remember here. And we still uphold our values here.
Today we remember your loss, we share your sorrow, and we honor the men and women you have loved so long and so well.
When you see this symbol,
holding each other tight, mourning those who they lost. 3 presidents and first ladies together attending the memorial ceremony in Lower Manhattan. Tolling bells and moments of silence marking the times the planes hit the 2 towers and when each fell. And at the Pentagon, a large American flag was draped down the side of the building ahead of each victim's name being read there.
J. Joseph Ferguson. Amelia V. Fields.
In Shanksville, Pennsylvania, where Flight 93 crashed into a field, the President and First Lady laid a wreath in memory of the everyday heroes who took down that plane that terrorists were using to target the nation's capital. Vice President Kamala Harris and former President George W. Bush also there to commemorate those lost. CNN is at each of those commemoration sites today, and with us right now, Laura Jarrett at the 9/11 Memorial in Lower Manhattan, Oren Lieberman at the Pentagon, and Paula Reed in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Laura, let me begin with you in Lower Manhattan, where the tributes to the fallen have been especially emotional in New York today.
Fred, the grief and the pain is still so raw. Even some
20 years later. So many of the families coming here today to pay tribute to their loved one in person, when last year they weren't able to come in person, of course, because of COVID-19. But today they came, they hugged, they had tears, they shared memories of their loved ones, trying to bring them to life, not just as victims who were killed, but as people who lived full lives, talking about their stories with smiles, with laughter, but also a fair amount of pain, saying that they felt like they could relive it just as fresh as it had happened just the day before. Take a listen to just a few of their stories from earlier today in Manhattan.
My uncle, firefighter Christopher Michael Mazzillo. I know you're with us every day watching over us, and even though I never met you in person, I still miss you a lot. Mom always tells me all the crazy fun things you did, and I'm sure if you were here, I'd probably be doing them with you. Thank you for being the best guardian angel.
My brother, Jimmy Ostrowski, Jimmy O. Jimmy, we miss you. Your kind blue eyes, your dimples, your sense of humor, but most importantly, your warm and caring ways that left a loving footprint in all of our hearts.
I came here, yes, with tears, but also a really happy heart to say that over the last 20 years, I have learned to live out loud just the way my brother taught me.
And Fred, one of the things that's so striking listening to these stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things is just the simple acts of kindness and bravery that so many of these people showed in the face of sheer terror. You can just imagine a father describing what his daughter, a flight attendant, went through as those planes hit the Twin Towers just in back of me here. And Fred, you know, this ceremony, this service has gone on for some 5 hours. Just also a temporal reminder, if you will, of the loss of life here. Some almost nearly 3,000 people who perished that day, Fred.
Yeah, it's an extraordinary number, extraordinary experience, so many times over. Thank you so much. Let's go to Oren now at the Pentagon. Tell us about this very personal ceremony taking place there.
Well, at the Pentagon, it has not only been a solemn day, it has been a solemn few days leading up to this moment. The weight of the 20th anniversary of 9/11 really felt throughout the building as everyone paused many times to reflect on what this meant, especially with the end of the war in Afghanistan. It was the same feeling, that heavy, burdened feeling, a feeling of pain in many cases, that was felt right after the terrorist bombing in Kabul that killed 13 service members, 11 Marines, a sailor, and a soldier. That would be the last U.S. troops to die in Afghanistan. That feeling that there is a burden here of remembrance, a burden here to never forget. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, said it is the solemn duty to remember, and he acknowledged that many here may be conflicted. His words, "You did your duty, your service mattered, your sacrifice was not in vain." That to some 800,000 U.S. service members who served in Afghanistan. Meanwhile, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin talked about the obligation of the Pentagon, that to protect the United States. And though it has fundamentally changed in what it does and where its focus is, he said this about that core obligation.
It is our responsibility to remember, and it is our duty to defend democracy. We cannot know what the next 20 years will bring. We cannot know what new dangers they will carry. We cannot foresee what Churchill once called the originality of malice. But we do know that America will always lead.
There was a moment of silence right about at 9:37 in the morning, 20 years after the attack at the Pentagon, to the minute. As we paused on that moment, it's worth going back and thinking back about what happened here at the Pentagon on that day. Then Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld, whose role in wars in Iraq and Afghanistan will certainly be debated for years, if not longer than that. On that day, he made a critical decision. First, he made a decision to help at the site of the attack. When his security pulled him away, he made a decision the Pentagon would not shut down. It would remain open, it would remain functioning. In a sense, it would be a survivor of the attack and the repairs, the renovations completed in 1 year. Another incredible moment that talks about how much that moment shaped U.S. foreign policy in the Pentagon from that moment on. The acting chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff at that moment, Richard Myers, was in a morning meeting on Capitol Hill. He had taken with him an Army captain, an intern in the Pentagon, and they rushed back to the Pentagon after the attack. 20 years later, that Army captain would become Major General Chris Donahue, the commander of the 82nd Airborne, the last U.S. service member on the ground in Afghanistan just a few days ago.
Oren Lieberman, thank you so much at the Pentagon. Appreciate that. Just ahead of this day, 9/11, President Biden said he would make appearances at all of the 3 terror sites. The president still in Pennsylvania, as we understand. Arlette Saenz is at the White House for us. Arlette, tell us more about. All right. It looks like the president is still in the Shanksville area of Pennsylvania and is expected to make his way to the Pentagon as well. Arlette Saenz is with us now. Arlette.
Hi, Fred. Well, President Biden was visiting the site at Shanksville, Pennsylvania, laying a wreath as he paid tribute. One of the 3 stops the president will be making over the course of the day today to commemorate the attacks of September 11, 2001. The president started his day a bit earlier in New York City at Ground Zero, accompanied also by former President Barack Obama and former President Bill Clinton. But just moments ago, he and his wife were walking the grounds there in Shanksville to pay their respect, to meet with some of the families, and they laid a wreath in honor of, in front of the name of one man in particular. His name was Jeremy Glick. He was 31 years old, and he was on that United Flight 93. He was one of the men who overtook the hijackers, who had intended to crash that plane into the U.S. Capitol, but instead, with the bravery of those passengers and the crew members on Flight 93, they were able to overcome them, and ultimately that flight crashed in the fields near Shanksville, Pennsylvania. A real moment of patriotism and bravery. Really, so many people on that flight sacrificing their lives. And the president has actually traveled to Shanksville, Pennsylvania on other occasions as well. Back in 2012, I had the opportunity to fly with him there as he visited and paid tribute. He also went back in 2020 as a presidential candidate. He was there laying a wreath on the exact same day, just hours apart from former President Trump. So this is a site that the Biden family is familiar with. In the past, in 2012, he had stopped at a local fire station as he was making that visit. He did so again in 2020. We will see whether that might be on his agenda for today. But the president will be rounding out his tributes and moments of commemoration when he travels to the Pentagon, where another plane had crashed on September 11th. The president and his wife, they will also be joined by Vice President Harris, as well as Second Gentleman Doug Emhoff, to lay a wreath on the grounds there at the Pentagon. And this was just 20 years ago today when President Biden was then a senator. The senator from Delaware, who was chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, he was up on Capitol Hill as these attacks were playing out. And that United Flight 93, the one that he is there commemorating and honoring the lives lost in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, that was one that hijackers had hoped would get to the Capitol, but ultimately, with the heroism and bravery of those passengers and the crew, that did not happen. So we will see the president over the course of the next few hours. The White House said it was important to him to visit all 3 sites on September 11th, and then he'll be traveling home to Wilmington, Delaware, a bit later in the day.
All right, Arlette Saenz, thank you so much for that update. And of course, we'll continue to keep eyes on the president's whereabouts.
Aston Villa and McGinn with the turn
for USF.
Weather. That works really well when you're traveling.
Well, I remember, first of all, as I was fixing to go get some crown molding off of my bathroom. We had a plumbing adventure. We had a bathtub leak, and we had to have our bathroom redone upstairs. Well, I was watching a program, and then I saw a plane go into the tower, and then I was watching it again. I thought, well, maybe it's an aviation error. Then I saw the plane going into the other tower, and then I figured, well, something's up. It's got to be something else. And there can't be 2 in one day like that. And then I saw not even an hour and a half, I saw the tower collapse, the two towers collapse. And it was just, you know, it was just something. And I had my daughter in school, and I regret not getting her out of school right now. I still regret it to this day. But I couldn't drive, and I still can't drive. So, you know, I thought maybe it was best to leave there. My husband was working at Division of Blind Services, and his administrative director said, "Go, you know, get to the TV. There's something going on." And all of the people that were there were gathered around.
So how do you think our country has changed in the last 20 years?
Well, I don't want to say, because I mean, I think Afghanistan, I think the thing of it is, you know, the way we got out of Afghanistan shouldn't have happened. We in a materiel for the terrorists, I think so, but I know how it changed the day of 9/11. I know that it was more patriotism. There was more, you know, people were more behind the flag than they ever were in my whole life before that.
All right. Thank you, ma'am, for calling in to Nice and Springfield, Massachusetts. Tell us your story.
Well, like I was saying, I was getting up to go to work, had the radio on, didn't hear anything. Got in my car, radio on in the car, nothing. I get to work. My boss walks in. He says, "Did you hear what happened in New York?" And I said, "No, what?" "The towers just got attacked." I said, "You're kidding." "No, I'm not," he says. So when I got home later that day, I turned the TV on, and I just couldn't believe my eyes. I mean, not December 7th, 1941. Granted, nobody, hardly any, us kids weren't around, but we learned about it. And when they said it was a day of infamy, and again we get attacked by foreign people, I mean, this is ridiculous. I mean, to see those two towers come down, and then the Pentagon, and then, thank God, those people in that plane got the courage to take that plane and not go into any other buildings.
Have you been watching the ceremonies today?
Oh, all day, since yesterday.
All right.
And I dragged out my two books that I have by Lisa Beamer and Among the Heroes, 93. They are heroes. They should deserve a Medal of Honor.
Have you visited the Flight 93 Memorial in Shanksville?
Haven't had the opportunity yet, but I want to go because I want to pay my respects.
That's Denise in Springfield, Massachusetts, and this is John in Hegewisch, Illinois. John, what do you remember about that day 20 years ago?
Well, one of my very best buddies worked for United Airlines, and he was a jet mechanic at Logan Airport, and he worked midnights that night. When he left work, of course, everything was on the up and up, and he left work, and he stopped at a little grocery store on the way home from work to get a cup of coffee. And the little lady behind the counter says, Jimmy, do you know what happened in New York? And of course, my buddy says no, and she says an airplane just ran into the trade centers, and of course he was dumbfounded, and of course he went home and then got all the information about one of the airplanes leaving from Boston, and of course one of his compatriots, a fellow jet mechanic, had worked on that bird that very night, and of course when he left in the morning for home, he was just all the mechanics were just happy like hell to be off of the job and like a normal day, and then you know what hit the fan for all of America, Pete.
That's John in Illinois, and this is Greta here in Washington.
For our viewers this morning, from September 12th, 2001, the New York Times will begin with their headline, U.S. attacked is all they wrote on the front page of their newspaper that day. The New York Post put out a special edition in the afternoon. Act of war is what they called it. The New York Daily News with their own special edition that day, It's War. The Boston Globe, a new day, of infamy. And from the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, they wrote, "Who would do this?" This is from the Houston Chronicle that day. Terror hits home. From the LA Times, terrorist attack in New York and Pentagon. And this from the Detroit Free Press, America's darkest day. And from USA Today, act of war, quoting the president. From the Washington Post, terrorists hijack 4 airliners, destroy the World Trade Center, hit the Pentagon, hundreds are dead, and they note below that evidence pointing to the Osama bin Laden network that day. Finally, from the San Francisco Examiner, bastards on their front page.
Brooke is in Germanton, North Carolina. Brooke, please go ahead. Tell us about your remembrance of 9/11.
Yes, I was 9 years old. I was sitting in the classroom, and it happened to be Crazy Hair Day. And all of a sudden, the principal came on and told all the teachers to turn the TVs on. And we sat there and just watched. And we got to see the second plane hit. And being so young, you didn't really understand. But then all of a sudden you see, I didn't know what was falling from the building. And there were people. They were actually falling to the ground.
As a 9-year-old, what was it like to experience that?
It was terrifying because you didn't understand how something like that could happen here.
Is your memory, can you still see it clearly at this point?
I can see it just like it happened yesterday.
Suzanne, Post Falls, Idaho. Please go ahead. We're listening.
Yeah, Suzanne Williams. I was working on the highway in Monterey County in California, and we were grinding out the roadways, and the guys started to show up to work, and they were telling me the stories of these planes that were hitting the trade centers, and there was no television. We were working, and so I turned the radio on, and I'm listening to commentating. They were describing what was happening, but we could notice on the highway that it was becoming very eerie. All of a sudden, traffic is going very slow. At this time, I'm listening to the radio, and I'm hearing that they're landing all these planes. And it took us 4 hours to open the highway back to the public. And by that time, every plane was down, and it was so impressive. After the shift, when I finally got home and I turned the television on to listen to all the commentating, it was incredible to see the television, and they did such a wonderful job in explaining it, but to see the suffering was heartbreaking. And I know that the country was so slow motion for days. And the good thing is my niece is being married today to her fiance, John. It's going to happen here just in a few minutes. And they wanted something beautiful to happen instead of something that was hard to remember, hard to forget.
It sounds like the 9/11 memories, though, still spark emotion in you. Is that correct?
Oh, sure. I didn't know anybody that was directly affected by that. But to listen to people's stories, I have empathy for them. And yeah, it's still a tragic day. Anybody that remembers 9/11.
Well, all the best to your niece and her fiance on this day. Thomas in Westerville, Ohio. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I was a New Jersey State Trooper. Still get emotional. Excuse me. I was taking an extra course as a white realtor in Toms River, New Jersey, and we got notice that the first plane had crashed into the tower. TV was brought into the room, and we watched the second tower get hit. Shortly after that, a woman in the class got a phone call. Excuse me, I'm sorry. And she lost someone. I never got her name. I pointed to someone else in the class. I never got his name. And I drove her car home. He drove my car. It was about a 10 to 15-minute ride. She was with me. Neither one of us spoke a single word the whole way there and when I went back. But I know she lost someone. I think it was a son. And if she heard my story, I wish her well.
That's Thomas in Westerville, Ohio.
Approach to that war on terror.
A key component of the Biden doctrine is
over-the-horizon counterterrorism capability.
That means tracking terror from far away, and it's a break from previous post-9/11 presidents, including Obama, whose anti-terror strategy relied heavily upon boots on the ground in Afghanistan.
There's a future there that is brighter not only for the Afghan people, but for, most importantly, for American security. And you guys are the tip of the spear.
But without Americans in Afghanistan anymore, American military muscle will be hundreds or thousands of miles away.
We're going to retain an over-the-horizon capability that if they were to come back to be able to take them out, surgically move.
Critics charge this won't work.
Let me just say that that's more like over the rainbow.
Biden's own defense secretary says there's no question that it will be more difficult to identify and engage threats that emanate from the region. A Trump-era national security advisor recently explained why.
The hours it takes to fly either an unmanned or a manned mission from the Gulf to Afghanistan is extensive. So, in that time period, targets can move, hostages can be moved.
However, when the president made this promise,
we will not forgive, we will not forget. We will hunt you down to the ends of the earth, and you will pay the ultimate price.
That happened.
Our over-the-horizon capacity can work and has worked in going after ISIS targets and killing people who went after our troops.
Some doubt the long-term effectiveness of leaving terrorists alone in Afghanistan.
I would say this, without soldiers on the ground, with the CIA present helping them, the likelihood of another 9/11 has gone up by 70 or 80%.
But for now, the president is not looking back.
The war in Afghanistan is now over.
The president defends the way he pulled out by arguing that if the men who plotted 9/11 20 years ago had done so in a country other than Afghanistan, the United States never would have gone there, and he is now counting on advances in military technology to keep tabs on terrorists who could try to do it again. Eric.
All right, Peter, thanks so much.
Well, we want to take a look now here at former President Donald Trump. He is in New York City visiting the 17th precinct there at NYPD in Midtown Manhattan. Let's listen to see what the former president is saying.
What incredible job you do. I grew up with you, and you are New York's finest. You're incredible people. I know many of you, and I appreciate it. During the election, the New York City police endorsed Trump. You know that, right? First time they've ever endorsed a candidate. They told me, first time, maybe they do it every time, I don't know, but they told me first time they've ever endorsed a candidate for president, and it's a great honor. Having that endorsement meant more to me than anything, so I really appreciate it. You know what I thought I'd do? You've heard so many words, all you hear is words, and they become meaningless after a while when you hear some of these politicians talking. But if you have any questions, please, I'll give you a little chance. You can be a star. I see that's the fake news behind you, so Anybody have any questions? Huh? The big guy, look at the size of that guy. Anybody, do you have a question?
Spotlight's on me, I guess. Are you going to run again, Mr. President?
Oh, that's a tough question. Actually, for me, it's an easy question.
Okay.
So, I mean, I know what I'm going to do, but we're not supposed to be talking about it yet from the standpoint of campaign finance laws, which frankly are ridiculous, okay? You want to know the truth. But we have to live with it. But I think you're going to be happy. Let me put it that way, okay? I think you're going to be very happy when I see what's going on. We had the great economy in the world. We did things that nobody thought even possible. Everybody had the best jobs. We were even getting along with the other side. They were starting to come in and you know, the radical left, I call them, but they couldn't compete with what we were doing. From jobs to regulations to we rebuilt the military. They gave $85 billion of it away. Brand new Apache helicopters. Can you believe they gave them away?
I also want to bring in former Congresswoman Jane Harman, who is heading to an Intelligence Committee meeting at the Capitol on the morning of the attacks. Good afternoon to both of you. Thank you both so much for being with us here today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much.
Governor Keene, let me start with you, because here we are 20 years later. Can you share a bit about, you know, Allie and Stephanie and Jeff and I had talked at the start of this broadcast here about how we know so much more about what happened on September 11th, in large part because of the commission that you chaired, because of the investigative work that you did to try to put these pieces together so we could learn some lessons and figure out what we needed to do. There are some big changes, right, that came from it. I think the one that's most visceral to most Americans is, for example, in the aftermath of the attacks, changes to the TSA. We all know 11 days after 9/11, DHS was created, the Department of Homeland Security. From your perspective, can you talk about the lessons learned since then in the last 20 years and where we need to go next?
Yeah, the lessons. We took every problem we had in 9/11, analyzed it, and tried to make a recommendation. Made 41 of them, actually. And 40 of them were enacted in all or in part by the United States Congress. And by the way, in the creation of those recommendations, in the creation of the commission itself, nobody was more of a leader than Jane Harman. She was a really valuable person in the United States Congress to get this report done. But now the idea is that the largest reorganization of U.S. intelligence in history. We all those, except one. The only recommendation we couldn't get through was a reform of Congress, but everything else got through, and it has made this country a lot safer.
Congresswoman Harman, can I turn to you and your reflections from that day 20 years ago? Governor Keene rightfully notes what a force you were in the years after. What are you thinking about today? What are you remembering? What is standing out the most to you? I know this is emotional every year. I have to imagine this year it might take a different resonance.
Well, I was standing on the steps of the Capitol in the piece you just played, singing God Bless America with my colleague. To point out, we were all holding hands. It didn't matter whether Democrats were standing next to Republicans. Nobody asked that question that day. America was under attack. And we, America, those of us in political roles, were putting the country first. And I just want to say back to Tom Paine, marvelous man, former governor of New Jersey. He co-chaired the 9/11 Commission with Lee Hamilton, who served in Congress with many of us, chaired the Foreign Affairs Committee, and was my predecessor at Wilson Center. Succeeded him. It was a huge honor, and chaired and was president of the place for a decade. But that commission succeeded because of the seamless bipartisanship of its chairs. There was not one press event where that had just one of them there. They were both there. And a colleague of mine, former colleague Kim Rome.
For you and your young ladies.
You know, I would have to say that this has been a really beautiful day of commemoration and just reflection, remembering Tom's life and the heroism of Flight 93, enjoying the Memorial Plaza and the park. It's been wonderful to be able to reconnect with some of the family members that we've lost touch with. And I think for the girls, it's probably been healing. Madison, would you say healing?
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah.
Oh, and because this is the first time, right? That's my understanding. This is the first time that the young ladies have been to Shanksville, and describe for me why it has felt healing, if you could.
Yes, so this is the first time they've been, and you know, the twins, Hallie and Madison, were 5 years old when Tom died. Anna Claire was 3. And so I think it's been healing just because they've had 20 years to think about what this place was like. It was kind of an anomaly. It was a mystery. And so then to be able to walk the ground, to see the trajectory of the plane through the monuments, and to be able to stand on the crash site, to be able to hold hands, to be able to pray, to be able to talk to some of the other children who lost a parent on that flight also. I think that that's really brought them full circle today. And for me to be able to experience that with them and watch them go through that has been actually very beautiful.
And so I wonder, Dina, Dina, for you, if leading up to this anniversary date, this marking of 20 years, did it feel different for you? Did you have to prepare yourself different emotionally leading up to this, especially since your girls were coming with you for the first time? But because this is such a big marker, 20 years, but for so many, it still feels like yesterday.
You know, I will say yes, for me this has been a very different anniversary, but I don't think it's because it's the 20th anniversary, and even though that's a very big milestone, for me this is the first year in which all of my girls are now educated. They're out of school and they're grown, working, living on their own, living out of state. And as a mom who was so incredibly concerned 20 years ago about how I was going to raise these 3 babies on my own, financially, emotionally, mentally, how I was going to do that, this is really the first anniversary in which I've been able to say, I did it. I did it. And so to be able to come back to Shanksville, to bring them, to show them where it all happened, and to be able to share that experience with my adult daughters has been, I'll just use the word again, it's really brought us full circle. And it's something that I didn't really think much about in preparing to come here. But once I arrived, I realized, this is really our chance to say that we can put closure, kind of an end cap on the past 20 years, because I was able to raise the girls the way that Tom and I wanted them raised. And, I think that this is kind of a commemoration for Tom and maybe a bit of a celebration for me, because they're great.
Yeah,
they turned out great.
I can just see these ladies right here, and I know they are very proud of you and your courage, and you too are a hero of the family, not just your husband, Tom. And I wonder if you could tell me a bit about your conversations with him when he was on that plane, because I've seen some of your other interviews, and I've read a lot about you too, and how you describe the way he handled it, his approach, reaching out to you, and the task at hand that really was indicative of who he was and how he lived his life. And I wonder if you could share some of that with us.
Absolutely. And that's really one of the reasons that I never brought the girls to the crash site when they were growing up, because I've always focused on how Tom lived his life. And September 11th was a culmination of who he was, the values he had, the integrity that he instilled in others. And so the phone calls were just a small part of his character and personality. But he did call me at least 3 times from the airplane. The first one, he just said, I'm on United Airlines Flight 93, Newark to San Francisco, and the plane has been hijacked. They've already knifed a guy. I need you to call the authorities. And he said that they were trying to get into the cockpit, the hijackers were. And he hung up the phone. And so I called 911. I was connected to the FBI. And while I was explaining to them that this was a 3rd airplane, not one that had crashed into the World Trade Center, Tom called a 2nd time. And I then told him about the World Trade Center and told him that they were hijacking planes up and down the East Coast. And he started asking questions. He said, who are these people? What do they want? What are they going to do with our plane? And he stated it's a suicide mission, and he started sharing the information I was giving him to the people around him. And he just sounded very matter of fact, like he was just gathering the information and trying to sort it out. He called again a third time, and he told me that that he had put a plan together to take back the airplane. They were waiting until they were over a rural area to take back the cockpit. He said not to worry, that there was a group of them. I told him that the kids wanted to talk to him, and he said, tell them I'll talk to them later. I told him I had called his parents and his sisters, and he said, oh, you shouldn't have worried them. So it was a conversation in which I could tell that he was really ready to get home. He was a little concerned in the last phone call, but he also was very confident. He was very capable. He seemed that he was very, very much in charge of the situation and going to make a difference. And so I believed him when he said that everything would be okay. And then his final words to me were, don't worry, we're going to do something. He hung up the phone, and they went down the aisle and into the cockpit.
And something indeed is what they did, and the instinct of looking out for others. I mean, that's what led him and his heart and the other heroes on board. Thank you so much, Dina, Haley, Madison, Anna Claire, for sharing Tom Burnett with us and for sharing the story and his legacy.
Thank you. Thank you for remembering.
All the best. Still ahead, a look inside.
Richard was an office clerk. He was sent out to run an errand at one police plaza. He learned about the attacks and raced to what would become Ground Zero. Tell us more, please.
He went to work that day, and I said goodbye, and he went to one police plaza to deliver some papers, and he was in the lobby there when he heard over the loudspeaker anyone with training to please report to a certain area. At that time, they thought it was just an accident, not a terrorist attack. So he reported, and they assigned him to a police officer who took him down to Ground Zero, and he went in and out helping save people's lives, and this was his life. And the interim, his boss called him and said, come right back to the law office he worked in. And he said, I cannot, it's my job to help. And that was the last we heard of him. And we found pictures of him in the, various magazines rescuing people. And he was a hero. He was 18 years old. Usually a child at that age runs the other way. He ran in. He was always helping. And he said it was my calling. It was my job to help save the lives of people.
Well, what true heroism for sure. You obviously did something wonderful, you and your husband, as a parent, to instill that sort of foundation in your son, Richard. What have the last 20 years been like for you, Ms. Perlman?
It's been a challenge, to tell you the truth, because I never saw him graduate his EMT class, to become what he wanted to do. There's always a constant remembrance of him. Every once in a while, I would go to the window looking for him to come home from work, and my daughter would say, Ma, he's not coming home. And, as the years go on, it doesn't get better. You just learn to adjust. The fact that I'll never see him get married, I'll never have grandchildren from him, it's a hard thing to deal with. On the good side, I have a granddaughter in his name named after him. I have a cousin named after him, and his legacy carries on. And the ambulance corps he belonged to, and the Boy Scouts he belonged to, and that was his life, the ambulance corps and the Boy Scouts.
Well, I know you are proud of what your son did, the legacy he leaves behind. He may not have graduated from those EMT classes, but trust me, he has a master in helping people, and the compassion and love that he exhibited is beyond. And we thank you, Ms. Perlman, for sharing your son Richard with us. Richard Perlman, we remember him and we bless his memory, and we bless you and your family. Dory Perlman, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you.
A remarkable young man. Let's take a live look at the World Trade Center site here in Lower Manhattan. You know, they called it Ground Zero. You may know about the big museum that is here, but you know there's another museum just around the corner. It is called the 9/11 Tribute Museum. It teaches us about the events of that day and what it means to the families of those who were lost, because that museum is run by the families. We'll have the head of that museum to tell us all about it when we come back.
And in Afghanistan in the fall of 2001 was successful. Many of the things we did at home to protect ourselves with the transportation security, TSA, was also good. But we panicked. And we went way too far in many ways. We tortured people. We created Guantanamo. We used warrantless surveillance on on the masses of Americans. We used drone warfare in a sort of untethered way that affected civilians. These are things we didn't need to do. We should trust our rigorous, professional, limited, precise use of force. And we shouldn't have had to reach for the world to do that, and we did. And so I think, the words of the president are very important to say, let's reflect, let's think, and next time, let's react in a way that we can still respect who we are, and we'll still be safe.
Hallie?
I'm here with Ann Guerin, of course, from the Washington Post, one of our contributors here at MSNBC. And I think you were able to hear the end of that conversation with Karen. I know we had some technical issues. And I want to talk about what we heard from President Biden just before that. Ali Velshi rightfully noted that we dipped in, we did a little interruption, which we don't always love to do. But President Biden was addressing specifically Afghanistan to our colleagues who cover the White House, your colleagues as well, who are there traveling with him in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. You are somebody who has covered this president and this man before he was president as senator for a long time. He obviously has had an evolution on his thinking as it relates to Afghanistan. Walk through that.
He has. I mean, he started out as a strong supporter of all of the actions taken in the immediate aftermath of 9/11 to invade Afghanistan along with allies to try to rout out the al-Qaeda cell that was there. And he remained a supporter of that strategy for several years. He also voted to authorize the use of force in Iraq. He came to regret both of those decisions. And by the time he was vice president, in the middle of that experience, when there was a troop surge in Afghanistan, he was arguing not fully against it, but that it needed to be smaller, it needed to be controlled, and that Obama was getting, in Obama's own words later, rolled by the generals.
And when you look at the messaging that he is delivering now after the withdrawal of troops from Afghanistan, one thing we've talked about, Ann, is the building is right behind us here. We talked about what a big building it is. We've talked about how meaningful this day is to so many who work there and who were working there on September 11th, and how emotional it is for some of them, right? Yeah. Less than a month now, just weeks after the withdrawal of troops, and now marking the anniversary of 9/11.
Yeah, I was working here during the surge, and the memories of 9/11 were 10 years more fresh than they are now. Many people I knew then had either been in the Pentagon on the day it was hit and then served in Afghanistan, or had entered service because of what happened in Afghanistan. It was a searing moment for the people who worked here, and it was something that forever affected the military and U.S. government from their forth.
Ann Guerin, thank you so much.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it. Steph, I'll turn it back to you and Allie.
Jeff?
Yeah, a question for Karen Greenberg. I'm sort of focused on the threat posed from within, the threat posed by far-right domestic extremists. We all saw what happened tragically at the Capitol on January 6th. There is another rally scheduled for next Saturday, in fact, a so-called Justice for J6 rally, both at the U.S. Capitol and about 13 state capitals all around the country, where you have people coming out in support of the insurrectionists. What is the sort of persistent, palpable domestic terror threat as you see it? And is this country, have we fully understood it, and are we fully prepared to deal with it?
I don't know that we fully understand it, but we are prepared to deal with it. And one of the lessons from 9/11 that speaks directly to this is that we have laws. We have laws in place that can that already criminalize much of what happened at the Capitol. We have to use them. And we have to use them in a strong and effective and evidence-based way. And so it may take some time. It may take some time to just link the evidence to the actors and to, complete the picture. But I have no worries that that's not going to happen. And it's one of the lessons from 9/11. We have to trust our laws. Ground zero, which, is used as an expression of a nuclear explosion, just like, the President Bush said, it destroyed buildings, it destroyed our confidence, it didn't destroy our values.
Karen, earlier today, former President George W. Bush talked about domestic terrorism and actually drew parallels to what we're seeing here to al-Qaeda. Let's share a little bit of that.
We have seen growing evidence that the dangers to our country can come not only across borders, but from violence that gathers within. There is little cultural overlap between violent extremists abroad and violent extremists at home. But in their disdain for pluralism, in their disregard for human life, in their determination to defile national symbols, they are children of the same foul spirit, and it is our continuing duty to confront them.
How significant is that?
Well, I think it's immensely significant for people who are going to write the histories of the beginning and end of this period of time. I do want to say something. In a way, he's
It sounds like we have a helicopter landing on top of us, but we don't.
It does.
It's passing. There's 7 helicopters flying directly above us right now. It's the same 7 that were heading north along the Hudson River. They've now moved inland over Manhattan. I mean, it looks like 7 helicopters, right? I might have even lost count. 7 helicopters have just flown south of us again, going back to where they came. Sorry for the interruption.
Let me tell you why that is an incredibly important thing he said. The 9/11 era is over. This period of time that started on 9/11, and we've been waiting for an endpoint. We've pulled out of Afghanistan. We're rethinking other things. And that statement, which was that we now have to basically turn our attention to domestic terrorists at home, it's a different kind of attention. It requires different kinds of intelligence collection, different kind of criminal authorities, law enforcement authorities.
Which we do not possess at the moment. We don't necessarily possess the right criminal authorities and laws to go after some of these domestic terrorists.
I'm not so sure. We could probably have a debate about that, and that's a longer forum. We have an incredible amount. Let's see them use them. Look at the limited number of charges that have been used so far.
But how much more complicated is it, right? We looked at America come together as one nation because it was a foreign adversary. Because this is coming from within, we have many political leaders that continue to downplay the acts and intentions of January 6th.
This is a problem. We need to have much better public education. And I don't mean public education like just schooling. I mean schooling the nation. We also need it to be, and this is the hard part, we need to figure out a way to get citizens to trust what they hear, to trust what they hear from their government. This idea that was spawned in part by the 9/11, post-9/11 era, which is that so much was secrecy, so much was held, largely on national security grounds and more. We need to sort of convince people that transparency is a value and that they can trust certain places to go.
But they do trust what they hear.
Yeah.
They just don't necessarily trust the government. They don't necessarily trust credible news sources, and we're living in the age of misinformation.
That's right. And we need to up our game in terms of understanding how to get civilians to be more educated about what misinformation is, and starting with children in schools and really being able to do that. And also, look, there's been movement, not enough, towards how to handle social media. And things like that. It's a road ahead, but the 9/11 era is behind us, and the new era of new threats is ahead of us.
I'm interesting that you're optimistic.
Primatene Mist is clinically shown to
Gray in 5 easy minutes.
They're just horribly despicable. You know, you can't buy class, and that's why he's not our president. I hope he doesn't become one. 9/11 is a sacred day. There should be no politics taken. Biden is handling it so classy, and I appreciate his adultness of handling things like a true leader, like a true adult, is what we need in this country. So I just want to...
What are your memories of 20 years ago?
My memories is very unusual. I'll try to make it brief, but my husband and I had visited New York, and we had seen the Twin Towers. We loved New York so much, we wanted to come back and bring our daughters. But, you know, we were a struggling family, and, you know, we couldn't afford to fly out to New York when we wanted to. But then 9/11 happened, and then when the Twin Towers went down, it just hit our hearts, because we remember how awesome they were when we went to New York and played tourist. And to imagine and see it on TV, the horrificness of it disintegrating like that and the horror going on hit our hearts so heavy, as did the country. So that day was extremely special to us. So a couple years later, when we were able to afford to go back to New York, because we still wanted to, we had the opportunity to do that, and I think we brought one of my daughters who was able to go. We're both daughters, I can't remember, and play tourist. And but my husband and I specifically, and we brought the girls, we wanted to touch that fence when they were rebuilding, or deciding on what they were going to do for the Twin Tower Memorial. You know, the cleanup and all that. There was just chain link fence. There were still letters and flowers and beautiful tributes on this wall. And to me and my husband, we wanted to touch that and be part of that and just say, New York and the rest of the world, we're here, we're doing the thing. We want to give our energy to this collaborative, that we're in it together. Well, ironically, 11 years later from 9/11, my husband was diagnosed with a glioblastoma, brain tumor, and so he ends up, it was critical. So the morning of an anniversary date in 2012, it was a beautiful morning, and I was getting my coffee in my kitchen, and I look out, and I see the most gorgeous huge white crane bird is what I called it. I could describe it, on my neighbor's roof. It looks like a huge stork, but it was so white. I had never seen a bird like that, so white and beautiful. And it was sitting on my neighbor's roof. So I went crazy, like, oh my God, it's 9/11. You know, what a beautiful spiritual bird to land on my neighbor's roof. So I called a neighbor and said, hey, look at this, you know, as like proof, like, you know, I'm not seeing things. Well, wouldn't you know it, that afternoon, my husband was at home, and he passed away on 9/11 of 2012. And to me, it was ironic, because the white bird, I thought, came because of the people of 9/11. But then later, my daughter said the white bird, which is an egret bird, represents the spirit going back to the heavens.
Linda, thank you for that. 9/11, a very significant day in your life.